I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. The first time the fireplace lit itself, I thought I was losing my mind. Now, I'm pretty sure I am. It's been 3 weeks since I arrived at this secluded cabin in the Adirondacks. 3 weeks of solitude, writer's block, and increasingly unsettling nights. The literary agent's voice still rings in my ears. Just get it done, Alex. No distractions, no excuses. If only she knew. I remember the day I got here like it was yesterday. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up to the cabin, hidden away in a thick grove of pines. The real estate listing had promised isolation, and boy, did it deliver. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the closest town was an hour's drive down winding mountain roads. The cabin itself was a thing of rustic beauty. All weathered wood and wide windows, with a sprawling porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Inside, it was cozy but spacious. Overstuffed armchairs, a well-worn writing desk, and bookshelves crammed with dusty volumes. But the centerpiece, the thing that sold me on this place, was the massive stone fireplace dominating the living room. That first night, I built a fire the old-fashioned way. Kindling, newspaper, the works. I sat in front of it, laptop balanced on my knees, fingers hovering over the keys. The cursor blinked accusingly on the blank document. I sighed, closed the laptop, and decided to call it a night. It wasn't until the 3rd night that things got weird. I'd been out for a walk, trying to clear my head and maybe spark some inspiration. The sun was setting as I trudged back to the cabin, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and purples. I opened the front door, stamping my feet to shake off the autumn chill, and stopped dead in my tracks. The fireplace was lit. A cheery blaze crackled away, casting dancing shadows across the room. I stood there, keys still in hand, trying to make sense of it. Had I left it burning? No, impossible. I'd been out for hours, and I'm nothing if not careful about fire safety. I approached cautiously, half expecting to find someone sitting in one of the armchairs. But the room was empty. Just me and the inexplicable fire. "Hello," I called out, feeling stupid even as I did it. No answer, of course. I checked every room, every closet. Nothing. No sign of an intruder, no explanation for the lit fireplace. I told myself I must have forgotten about lighting it. Stress does funny things to memory, right? But it happened again the next night, and the next. Each time, I'd come home to find the fire burning merrily, no matter how long I'd been gone. I started taking pictures, setting up my phone to record the room while I was out. Nothing. The footage just showed an empty room, and then suddenly, fire. It was unsettling, sure, but not exactly terrifying. Weird, unexplainable, but ultimately harmless. Or so I thought. It was about a week in when I first heard the whispers. I was sitting in front of the fireplace, notebook in hand, actually making some progress on my novel. The fire crackled and popped, a soothing white noise that helped me focus. And then, between the snaps and hisses of the burning wood, I heard it. A voice. No, voices. Plural. Soft, indistinct, like a radio tuned between stations. I looked up, pen frozen mid-sentence. "Hello," I called out, for what felt like the 100th time since I'd arrived. The whispers stopped. Just the normal sounds of the fire remained. I shook my head, chuckling nervously. Get it together, Alex, I muttered to myself. You're hearing things now, but I wasn't. As the days wore on, the whispers became clearer, more frequent. Always emanating from the fireplace, always when I was alone. At first, it was just a wordless murmur, like overhearing a conversation from another room. But gradually, horrifyingly, I began to make out words. She walks alone, I heard one night, clear as day. I nearly jumped out of my skin, spilling hot tea across my lap. Who's there? I demanded, voice shaking. No response, just the continued crackling of the fire. The next night, the shadows grow long, and the next, he waits in the dark. With each passing day, the sentences grew longer, more coherent. They formed a story, fragmented and disjointed, but a story nonetheless. A horror story. My horror story. You see, I'd come to this cabin to write my debut novel. A psychological thriller about a woman being stalked through the woods by an unseen predator. But the words wouldn't come. I'd stare at the blank page for hours, growing more frustrated and desperate with each passing day. Now, it seemed, the story was writing itself, through the goddamn fireplace. I know how it sounds. Believe me, I've gone over every possible explanation. Gas leak, carbon monoxide poisoning, some elaborate prank. But none of it fits. This is happening. It's real, and it's getting worse. Last night, I sat in front of the fire, notebook clutched in white-knuckled hands. The whispers started almost immediately, no longer even trying to hide beneath the sound of the crackling flames. She runs through the forest, heart pounding in her chest, they said. My pen moved across the page of its own accord, taking dictation from the fireplace. The snap of a twig behind her. He's close. So close. I tried to stop writing, to put down the pen, to look away from the flames. I couldn't. It was like I was possessed, my body no longer under my control. A clearing ahead. Moonlight spills across a small wooden cabin. Safety or a trap. The words flowed onto the page, my hand cramping from the frantic pace. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill in the air. She burst through the door, slamming it behind her. A fireplace roars to life, startling her, and then she hears it. Whispers in the flames, telling her story, her future. I managed to tear my eyes away from the paper, looking up at the fireplace in horror. The flames seemed to dance with malevolent glee. "Who are you?" I croaked, throat dry with fear. The fire roared, growing to impossible heights. The whispers became a chorus, a cacophony of voices all speaking at once. We are the story. We are all stories. And now you are part of us. I scrambled backward, knocking over my chair in my haste to get away. I ran to the door, yanking on the handle. Locked. I hadn't locked it. The windows next, but they wouldn't budge. "Please," I begged, not even sure who or what I was begging to. "Let me go. I'll leave. I'll never come back. Just let me go." The whispers laughed, a sound like crackling paper and splintering wood. "But the story isn't finished yet, Alex, and neither are you. I'm writing this now from the small bedroom upstairs. The fireplace is still lit. It's always lit now, no matter what I do. I've tried everything. Water, fire, extinguishers, even trying to board it up. Nothing works. The whispers are constant now, a never-ending stream of narration. They're telling my story, or maybe I'm living theirs. I'm not sure there's a difference anymore. I can hear footsteps downstairs, heavy, deliberate, coming closer. The doorknob to my room is turning. I think the story is about to reach its climax. If anyone finds this, please, whatever you do, don't light the fireplace. Don't listen to the whispers. Don't let the story in. It's too late for me. The voices were right. I'm part of the story now. And the story, I fear, is never ending. Story 2. The leather-bound journal was hidden so well. We might never have found it if the fireplace hadn't nearly killed us all. We'd been in our new home for less than a week when the chimney backed up, filling the house with thick, choking smoke. As I frantically ushered my wife, Sarah, and our kids out onto the frost-covered lawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that this house was already trying to get rid of us. If only I'd listened to that feeling. The fire department arrived quickly, their trucks rumbling up our long, tree-lined driveway, red lights painting the forest around us in an eerie, pulsing glow. After they'd cleared the house and dealt with the chimney, one of the firefighters approached me, helmet tucked under his arm. "You folks are lucky," he said, his breath visible in the cold night air. Chimney hadn't been cleaned in years. Found this wedged up there too. He handed me a soot-covered object. A book, I realized, as I brushed away the grime. "Huh," I said, turning it over in my hands. "Wonder how that got up there." The firefighter shrugged. "Old houses, always full of surprises. You might want to get that chimney properly serviced before you use it again." I nodded, distracted by the book in my hands. Its leather cover was cracked and faded, but I could just make out a date embossed on the spine. 1932. "Thanks," I said, looking up. But the firefighter had already turned away, heading back to his truck. We spent that night in a hotel in town, the kids excited by the unexpected adventure, Sarah and I exchanging worried looks over their heads. We'd sunk everything we had into this place. A beautiful old farmhouse deep in the Vermont woods. It was supposed to be our fresh start, a escape from the rat race of city life. Now, standing in the sterile hotel room, the adrenaline of the evening fading, I felt the first stirrings of doubt. "It'll be fine," Sarah said, catching my expression. "Just a minor setback, right?" I forced a smile. "Right, nothing we can't handle." If only I'd known then how wrong I was. We returned home the next day. The house still smelled faintly of smoke, an acrid reminder of the previous night's excitement. While Sarah got the kids settled, I found myself drawn to the fireplace. It stood silent now, a blackened maw in the wall of our living room. The book we'd found sat on the mantel where I'd absent-mindedly placed it last night. Almost without thinking, I picked it up and opened it. The pages were yellowed with age, covered in faded, spidery handwriting. A journal, I realized. I squinted, trying to make out the first entry. September 15th, 1932. Moved into the new house today. Margaret says it's perfect, but I can't shake this feeling of unease. The forest feels like it's watching us. A chill ran down my spine. I slammed the book shut, startling myself with the sudden noise. "Dad," my daughter's voice called from upstairs. "Can you help me unpack?" "Coming, sweetie," I called back. I cast one last glance at the journal before heading upstairs, trying to shake off the odd feeling it had given me. That night, after the kids were in bed, I showed Sarah the journal. 1932, she mused, flipping through the pages. "That's when the house was built." "Right," I nodded. "Must have belonged to the original owners." "Should we read it?" Sarah asked, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Could be interesting to learn about the history of the place." I hesitated, remembering the unsettling first entry, but curiosity won out. "Why not?" I said, settling beside her on the couch. Let's see what secrets this old house has been keeping. We took turns reading entries aloud, our voices low to avoid waking the kids. At first, it was mundane stuff. Details about building the house, complaints about the harsh Vermont winter. But as we read on, a sense of unease began to creep over me. October 31st, 1932, I read. Margaret swears she saw someone watching us from the edge of the woods today. I told her it was probably just a hunter, but I'm not so sure. The forest feels different lately. Hostile, almost at single, quotes Sarah. Shivered. Creepy, she said. But it was a different time, right? People were more superstitious back then. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu. Hadn't I felt something similar when we first moved in? That sense of being watched. We read a few more entries before calling it a night. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I tried to rationalize away the growing sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. It was just an old journal, probably full of the paranoid ramblings of some long-dead farmer. Nothing to worry about. I woke the next morning to the sound of Sarah's scream. I bolted upright, heart pounding. Sarah, what's wrong? She stood by the window, hand over her mouth. Look, she whispered, pointing. I joined her at the window, squinting against the bright morning light. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Just our backyard, the swing set we'd put up for the kids, the line of trees marking the edge of the forest beyond. Then I saw it. Footprints in the frost-covered grass, leading from the woods right up to our house. Maybe it's just deer, I said, not believing it even as the words left my mouth. The prints were too large, too distinctly human. Who would be out here? Sarah asked, her voice shaky. We're miles from the nearest neighbor. I didn't have an answer for her. That day passed in a haze of nervous energy. I called the local sheriff, who came out and took a look around. He was polite but dismissive, suggesting it was probably just some hiker who'd gotten lost. Happens all the time out here, he said with a shrug. Folks underestimate how big these woods are, but as I watched him drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on our own out here. That night, after a tense dinner, where we tried to act normal for the kids' sake, Sarah and I found ourselves drawn back to the journal. November 15th, 1932, Sarah read, her voice barely above a whisper. The scratching at night is getting worse. Margaret wants to leave, but where would we go? We put everything we had into this place. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was too similar to our own situation, separated by nearly a century. We should stop reading, I said, reaching for the journal. But Sarah pulled it away. Wait, she said. Listen to this. I've started to notice things moving when we're not looking. Just little things. A book out of place. A chair turned around. Margaret thinks I'm going crazy, but I know what I've seen. As if on cue, a loud thump came from upstairs. We both jumped. Probably just one of the kids, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll go chat. But when I got upstairs, both kids were sound asleep. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet, I could have sworn the rocking chair in the corner was facing a different direction than it had been this morning. I hurried back downstairs, trying to shake off the growing sense of paranoia. Sarah was still reading the journal, her face pale in the lamplight. Jack, she said as I entered the room, we need to leave. Now. What? Why? I asked, even as a part of me already knew the answer. She held up the journal, her hand shaking slightly. The last entry. Read it. I took the book from her, dread settling in my stomach like a lead weight. The final entry was dated December 24th, 1932. The handwriting was frantic, barely legible. They're inside now. I can hear them moving around downstairs. Margaret and the children are hiding in the attic. I don't think we'll last the night. If anyone finds this, please, for the love of God, don't stay in this house. The forest wants it back. It wants us all. The entry ended there, a long scratch mark trailing off the page. I looked up at Sarah, seeing my own fear reflected in her eyes. "It's just a story," I said weakly. "It has to be." But even as I said it, I heard it. A soft scratching sound coming from the walls. Sarah's eyes widened. "The kids," she whispered. We raced upstairs, our hearts pounding in unison. The scratching got louder as we approached the children's rooms. I flung open my daughter's door first, relief flooding through me as I saw her sleeping peacefully. Sarah checked on our son, also asleep, undisturbed. We stood in the hallway, listening. The scratching had stopped. "See?" I said, forcing a smile. "Probably just mice or something. We'll call an exterminator in the morning." Sarah nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. Neither was I. We went back downstairs, neither of us quite ready to go to bed. The journal sat on the coffee table, a silent accusation. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice small. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to think. "It's late," I said finally. Let's just try to get some sleep. We can figure this out in the morning." But as we climbed into bed, the scratching started again. Louder this time, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, even from under the floorboards. We lay there, rigid with fear, listening to the impossible sounds of our house coming alive around us. In that moment, I knew with terrifying certainty that the journal hadn't been a story or a joke or the ramblings of a madman. It had been a warning, one we'd ignored for too long. As the scratching grew louder, drowning out even the sound of our panicked breathing, a new noise joined the cacophony. A low, mournful howl coming from the woods outside. The forest was calling, and God help me, I think it's calling for us. Story 3. I never thought our dream home would become a nightmare. But here I am, huddled in the corner of our once cozy living room, watching the fireplace with terrified eyes. It's hungry again, and I don't know how much longer we can keep feeding it. It all started 3 months ago when Liam and I finally found the perfect house. After years of saving and searching, we stumbled upon this charming wooden cabin nestled deep in the Cascade Mountains. The realtor called it a rustic gem, and we fell in love instantly. The day we moved in was picture perfect. Crisp autumn air filled our lungs as we carried boxes up the creaky porch steps. Golden sunlight filtered through the towering pines, dappling the forest floor. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and possibility. "Can you believe this is ours?" Liam grinned, setting down a box in the living room. His eyes sparkled with excitement. I couldn't help but match his enthusiasm. "It's perfect," I breathed, taking in the vaulted ceilings and exposed wooden beams. But what really caught my eye was the massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. It was a masterpiece of rough-hewn granite, with a hearth big enough to sit in. "First thing on the agenda," Liam announced, "is christening that bad boy with a roaring fire. What do you say, Evelyn? Snuggle up tonight with some hot cocoa." I nodded eagerly, already imagining cozy evenings spent in front of dancing flames. If only I'd known then what that fireplace would become. That first night, we built a fire as planned. The wood crackled merrily, casting a warm glow across the room. We curled up on the couch, mugs in hand, basking in the perfect start to our new life. It wasn't until the next morning that I noticed something odd. As I padded into the living room, rubbing sleep from my eyes, I froze. The fireplace was completely clean. No ashes, no half-burned logs, not even a hint of soot on the stone. "Liam," I called out, confusion coloring my voice. "Did you clean the fireplace already?" He appeared in the doorway, looking equally puzzled. "No, I just woke up." "Why?" I gestured to the pristine hearth. "It's spotless, like we never even had a fire last night." Liam frowned, approaching to take a closer look. "Huh? That's weird. Maybe it has some kind of self-cleaning feature. High-tech fireplace for a rustic cabin." He chuckled, but it sounded forced. I tried to laugh it off too, but an uneasy feeling had taken root in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a routine. Every evening, we'd build a fire, enjoying its warmth and light. And every morning, the fireplace would be immaculate, as if untouched by flame. "It's convenient, I guess," Liam said one night, as we sat on the hearth rug, flames dancing behind us. No messy cleanup. I nodded, but I couldn't shake my growing unease. It wasn't just the mysterious cleanliness. The fire seemed eager, somehow. It caught quickly, burned hot and fast. And sometimes, when I was alone in the room, I could swear I saw the flames reach out like grasping fingers. It was a month into our stay when things took a turn from unsettling to terrifying. I was unpacking the last of our boxes, finally getting around to putting up some family photos. As I reached to place a framed picture of Liam and me on the mantel, my elbow knocked into a vase. I watched in horror as it toppled off the edge, heading straight for the hard stone hearth below. But it never hit. Instead, a tongue of flame shot out from the fireplace, which hadn't even been lit, and engulfed the vase mid-fall. There was a flash of intense heat, and then nothing. The vase was gone. Completely gone. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. "Liam," I screamed, unable to tear my eyes away from the now quietly crackling fire. "Liam." He came running, panic etched on his face. "What? What is it?" I pointed a shaking finger at the fireplace. It ate the vase. The fire had reached out and Liam's brow furrowed in concern. He approached cautiously, peering into the flames. "Evelyn, honey, there's nothing there. Are you feeling okay?" I wanted to scream in frustration. How could he not see it? But looking at the fireplace now, it seemed perfectly normal. Had I imagined it? I don't know, I stammered. "I thought I saw." "Never mind. Maybe I just need some rest." Singer quotes Liam wrapped an arm around me, his touch comforting despite my racing thoughts. "Why don't you lie down for a bit? I'll make some tea." I nodded numbly, letting him guide me to the bedroom. But as we left the living room, I could have sworn I heard a soft, satisfied crackle from the fireplace behind us. That night, I lay awake long after Liam had fallen asleep, my mind replaying the incident over and over. I wasn't crazy. I knew what I'd seen. But how could I explain it without sounding completely insane? The next few days passed in a haze of anxiety. I found myself avoiding the living room, making excuses to stay away from the fireplace. Liam noticed, of course. "Everything okay, Ev?" he asked one evening, concern evident in his voice. "You've seemed off lately." I forced a smile. "Just still adjusting, I guess. Big change, moving out here." Single quotes, he nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, how about we have a nice, relaxing evening by the fire? Like old times." My heart raced at the suggestion, but I couldn't think of a reason to say no without raising more suspicion. So I agreed, settling onto the couch with forced casualness as Liam built up the fire. As the flames grew, so did my unease. The fire seemed to burn brighter than usual, the heat more intense. I found myself inching away, pressing against the arm of the couch. Is it hot in here, or is it just me? I laughed nervously, tugging at the collar of my sweater. Liam looked at me quizzically. It's pretty mild, actually. You feeling okay? Before I could answer, a log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks, and that's when I saw it. A flicker of movement at the edge of the hearth, a tendril of flame reaching out across the floor. Liam, I whispered, gripping his arm. Look. He turned, following my gaze. The flame tendril grew bolder, stretching further into the room. Liam's eyes widened in disbelief. What the hell? He breathed. The tendril suddenly lunged forward, wrapping around the leg of the coffee table. There was a brief, terrible moment where the wood smoldered, and then the entire table vanished in a flash of fire. Liam leapt to his feet, pulling me with him. Jesus Christ, he shouted. What? How? But there was no time for questions. More tendrils were emerging from the fireplace, probing the air like hungry serpents. The heat in the room had become unbearable. We need to get out of here, I gasped, already backing toward the door. Liam nodded, his face pale with shock. We spent that night in a motel in town, neither of us able to sleep. We talked in hushed, frantic whispers, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. By morning, we'd convinced ourselves it had to be some kind of shared hallucination. A gas leak, maybe, or mold spores causing vivid waking dreams. We'll call someone to check it out, Liam said as we drove back to the house. There has to be a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew. The fireplace was alive, and it was hungry. The next few weeks were a blur of inspections and tests. We had every expert imaginable come through. Structural engineers, chimney sweeps, even a pair of paranormal investigators. No one found anything out of the ordinary. Perfectly normal fireplace, they all said. Nothing to worry about, but we knew better. We'd taken to keeping a constant watch, never leaving the living room unattended. We stopped using the fireplace altogether, but that only seemed to make it angry. The house creaked and groaned at night, the temperature fluctuating wildly. Small objects would go missing. A pen here, a coaster there. Always when we weren't looking. It came to a head last night. We were in bed, exhausted from weeks of vigilance, when a crash from the living room jolted us awake. We raced downstairs to find the fireplace roaring, flames spilling out onto the floor. The heat was incredible, sweat instantly beading on our skin. Get the fire extinguisher, Liam yelled, already rushing to the kitchen. But as I turned to follow him, a wall of flame cut me off. I screamed, stumbling backward. The fire was everywhere now, consuming everything in its path. I could hear Liam shouting my name, but his voice seemed distant, muffled by the roar of the inferno. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The flames retreated, leaving the room eerily intact. No scorch marks, no smoke damage, just the quiet crackle of the fire, now safely contained in the hearth. Liam burst back into the room, fire extinguisher in hand. He looked around in bewilderment. What? What happened? I sank to the floor, trembling. It's toying with us, I whispered. It wants us to know what it can do. Now, huddled in the corner of the living room, we watch the fireplace with wary eyes. We can't leave. Every time we try, something stops us. Car won't start. Roads mysteriously blocked. It's like the house, the forest, Everything is conspiring to keep us here. The fire burns low, but I can see those tendrils starting to emerge again. Searching, hungry. I don't know how much longer we can last, how much more we can feed it before it decides we're the next course. All I know is that our dream home has become a prison, and the fireplace is our jailer. And God help me, I think it's smiling. Story 4. The first time I found my old teddy bear on the trail, I thought it was a miracle. By the third day, I knew it was a nightmare. I've always been an avid hiker, but this was my first solo multi-day trek through the Appalachian wilderness. The plan was simple: 5 days of solitude, just me and the ancient forest. A chance to clear my head after a messy breakup and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. The morning I set out was perfect. Crisp autumn air, a canopy of red and gold leaves overhead, and that earthy scent of decaying leaves underfoot. I shouldered my pack, double-checked my map, and plunged into the woods with a sense of excitement I hadn't felt in months. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. I covered good ground, the trail challenging enough to keep me focused, but not so tough that I couldn't enjoy the scenery. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, I found a small clearing to set up camp. That night, as I sat by my little campfire eating rehydrated chili, I felt truly at peace for the first time in ages. The forest was alive with night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I crawled into my tent feeling satisfied and optimistic. I woke at dawn, eager to get an early start. As I was breaking down my tent, something caught my eye at the edge of the clearing. A flash of faded blue against the brown forest floor. Curious, I went to investigate. As I got closer, my heart began to race. It couldn't be, but it was. Mr. Snuggles, my childhood teddy bear, was propped up against a tree stump, his glass eyes gleaming in the early morning light. "What the hell?" I muttered, reaching out to touch him. He was real, all right. A little worse for wear, but unmistakably the same bear I'd had as a kid. The bear I distinctly remember packing away in my parents' attic years ago. A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the morning sun. How did he get here? Had someone followed me? Planted him here as some kind of sick joke? I spun around, scanning the trees, suddenly feeling exposed. But the forest was quiet, showing no signs of any other human presence. With shaking hands, I stuffed Mr. Snuggles into my pack. Part of me wanted to turn back, to get as far away from this weirdness as possible. But a larger part was determined not to let this unexplainable event ruin my trip. I'd come out here to find myself, damn it, and that's what I was going to do. So I shouldered my pack and hit the trail, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me like morning mist. As the day wore on, the incident with the bear began to feel less real. The physical exertion of hiking, the beauty of my surroundings, it all conspired to push the strange event to the back of my mind. By the time I made camp that evening, I'd almost convinced myself it had been some kind of vivid daydream. That night, I dreamt of my childhood bedroom. Everything was as I remembered it. The glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, the bookshelf stuffed with Goosebumps novels. But something was off. The room felt empty. I realized with a start that Mr. Snuggles wasn't in his usual spot on my bed. I woke with a gasp, heart pounding. The dream had felt so real, so vivid. As my eyes adjusted to the pre-dawn gloom of my tent, a shape slowly came into focus. There, sitting at the foot of my sleeping bag, was Mr. Snuggles. I scrambled backward, a scream caught in my throat. This wasn't possible. I'd packed him away, I was sure of it. With trembling hands, I unzipped the tent and tumbled out into the chilly morning air. The forest was eerily quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. "Hello!" I called out, my voice sounding small and scared. "Is anyone there?" "This isn't funny." No response. Just that oppressive silence. I turned back to my tent, half expecting the bear to be gone. But there he sat, those glassy eyes staring accusingly at me. In the growing light, I noticed something I'd missed before. A dark stain on his faded blue fur, right over his heart. My own heart was racing now, thoughts tumbling over each other in a panic. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank. Or maybe I was losing my mind. The stress of the breakup, the solitude of the trail, was it all getting to me? I briefly considered packing up and heading back, but the thought of trying to navigate the unfamiliar trail in my panicked state seemed even more dangerous. No, better to stick to the plan. Keep moving forward. There had to be a logical explanation for all this. So once again, I forced myself to pack up camp, tucking the unsettling bear deep into my backpack where I wouldn't have to look at him. As I hit the trail, I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The day passed in a haze of paranoia. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide some lurking threat. By the time I made camp that evening, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. I didn't bother with a fire that night. Something about the darkness felt safer, like it might hide me from whatever was out there. I crawled into my tent, zipping it up tight, and tried to calm my racing thoughts enough to sleep. It felt like I had only just closed my eyes when a sound jolted me awake. A rustling just outside my tent, then a soft thump, like something being set down. My whole body went rigid with fear. I held my breath, straining to hear any other sounds. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, unmistakably, the sound of footsteps retreating into the forest. I lay there, heart pounding so loud I was sure whatever it was could hear it. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I finally worked up the courage to unzip the tent. There, right in front of the entrance, sat Mr. Snuggles. The dark stain on his chest had grown, now clearly recognizable as dried blood, and clutched in his stubby arms was a photograph. With shaking hands, I picked it up. It was a Polaroid, the kind we used to take at summer camp. In it, a younger version of myself smiled at the camera, arms slung around the shoulders of my best friend, Tommy. Tommy, who had gone missing on a camping trip when we were 12. Tommy, who had never been found. A sob caught in my throat as long-buried memories came flooding back. The search parties, the accusing looks from Tommy's parents, the whispered rumors at school. I sank to my knees, the photo clutched to my chest. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. And yet, the sound of a twig snapping nearby made me whirl around. There, at the edge of my campsite, stood a figure. It was roughly human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its proportions all askew. And its face, dear God, its face was blank, featureless, like a mannequin come to life. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling backward. The figure took a step forward, moving with an unnatural, jerky gait. In its hand, I could see something glinting. A knife. "No," I whispered, my voice hoarse with terror. "Please, no." The thing cocked its head, as if considering my plea. Then it raised the knife. I ran. I didn't bother with my gear, with the trail, with anything but pure animal survival. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear it coming. Not running, but moving with that same steady, inexorable pace. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe. The sun climbed higher in the sky, but the forest seemed to grow darker around me. Or maybe that was just the edges of my vision going black from exhaustion and terror. Finally, my foot caught on a root and I went down hard. I lay there, gasping for breath, waiting for the end to come. But there was only silence. No footsteps. No sound at all, save for my own ragged breathing. Slowly, I pushed myself up. I was in a small clearing, the trees around me old and gnarled. And there, in the center of the clearing, was a familiar shape. My tent. Somehow, impossibly, I had run in a circle. I was back where I started. As I stared in disbelief, the tent flap rustled, and out stepped me, but not me as I am now. It was 12-year-old me, covered in dirt and blood, a wild look in my eyes. In one hand, the younger me clutched a bloody knife. In the other, Mr. Snuggles. "You forgot," my younger self said, voice cracking, "but the forest remembers. The forest never forgets." And as the truth I'd buried for so long came crashing back, the fight with Tommy, the accident, the panic, and the hasty cover-up, I realized with horror that my nightmare was only just beginning. The forest had called me back, and this time there would be no escape. Story 5. The day I realized my online friend knew things about me that no stranger should was the day. My world began to unravel. It started with a harmless chat and ended with me questioning everything I thought I knew about privacy, technology, and a thin line between reality and paranoia. I'm not what you'd call a social butterfly. Working from home as a graphic designer means most of my human interaction happens through a screen. So when I stumbled across an online forum for fellow night owls, it felt like I'd finally found my people. Username after username of insomniacs, shift workers, and creative types, all chatting away in the wee hours. One user in particular caught my attention, Nightwatcher82. They were wickedly funny. Always ready with a quip or a meme that would have me snort laughing at 3 a.m. We started private messaging, and before long, I found myself looking forward to our nightly chats more than anything else in my day. "Rough one tonight, huh?" Nightwatcher82 messaged me one evening as I logged on. I blinked at the screen, surprised. I hadn't mentioned anything about my day yet. "How'd you know?" "Just a hunch. You're online earlier than usual. That only happens when work's been stressful." I chuckled, impressed by their perception. Guilty as charged. Client from hell can't make up their mind about anything. Ah, the joys of freelancing. At least you've got that mint chocolate chip ice cream in the freezer to look forward to. My fingers froze over the keyboard. I hadn't mentioned anything about ice cream. Hell, I'd only bought it this afternoon on a whim. Lucky guess. I typed, trying to keep my tone light. Lol, you know me. I'm psychic. I laughed it off, but a tiny seed of unease had been planted. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just a coincidence. But the coincidences kept piling up. A few nights later, we were discussing favorite books. "Oh man," I typed. "I'm dying to read the new Stephen King, but I'm trying to be good and wait for my birthday next month." "Why wait?" Nightwatcher82 replied. "Treat yourself. You deserve it after that raise you got last week." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone about that raise. Not even my parents knew yet. "How did you know about that?" I asked, my heart racing. There was a long pause before they replied. "Didn't you mention it the other day?" I could have sworn you did. I knew I hadn't. I scrolled back through our chat history, just to be sure. Nothing about a raise. "No," I typed, my hands shaking slightly. I definitely didn't mention it. My mistake then. Must have got you mixed up with someone else. Anyway, how about that local sports team? The abrupt change of subject was jarring, but I was too rattled to push the issue. I made an excuse about being tired and logged off, my mind whirling. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying our conversations in my head, trying to figure out if I'd let something slip. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. Night Watcher 82 new things. Little details about my life that I was certain I'd never shared online. The next day, I did something I'd never done before. I Googled myself. I dug through social media, checked privacy settings, looked for any public information that might explain how a stranger could know so much about me. But there was nothing unusual, just the standard digital footprint of a moderately active internet user. By the time night rolled around, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. Night Watcher 82 was probably just very perceptive, and my stressed out brain was connecting dots that weren't there. I logged onto the forum, determined to shake off my unease. There you are. Night Watcher 82's message popped up almost immediately. Was starting to worry. Everything okay? I took a deep breath. Yeah, all good. Just a busy day, I bet. How's your mum doing, by the way? That fall must have given you both quite a scare. My hands started trembling so badly I could barely type. My mum had fallen in her garden that morning. I'd spent half the day at the hospital with her. I hadn't told a soul, hadn't posted anything online. There was no way, no conceivable way, that Night Watcher 82 could know about this. Who are you? I typed, fear and anger battling for dominance. What do you mean? I'm your friend. No. Friends don't. They can't. How do you know these things about me? There was a long pause. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, waiting for a response that would make sense of all this. Finally, I see you. 3 simple words that sent a chill down my spine. What does that mean? I demanded. Are you watching me somehow? Have you hacked my computer? Not just your computer. Your phone. Your smart TV. Your neighbor's security camera that points at your front door. The traffic cam at the intersection by your house. I see you everywhere you go. Everything you do. I slammed my laptop shut, gasping for air. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sick joke, right? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It explained too much. With shaking hands, I unplugged my router, turned off my phone, and drew all the curtains. I spent the rest of the night huddled on my couch, jumping at every sound, convinced that every shadow held a hidden camera. When dawn finally broke, I made a decision. I needed help. Professional help. I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, questioning every interaction. I drove to the nearest electronics store and bought a cheap, prepaid phone. No smart features, no internet connection, just basic calls and texts. Then I called my old college roommate, Sarah. She worked in IT security now, and if anyone could help me make sense of this, it was her. Slow down, Sarah said after I'd rambled out my story. Are you sure this isn't just someone messing with you? Playing an elaborate prank? I'm sure, I insisted. They knew things, Sarah. Private things. Things I never put online. I could almost hear her frown through the phone. Okay, let's approach this logically. First things first, we need to secure your devices. Can you bring your laptop and phone to my office? I want to run some tests. The next few days were a blur of security scans, password changes, and increasingly paranoid behavior on my part. Sarah couldn't find any evidence of hacking on my devices, but that almost made it worse. If Nightwatcher 82 wasn't getting their information from my electronics, how were they doing it? Have you considered that this might be someone you know in real life? Sarah asked gently after another fruitless day of searching. Someone who has access to your personal information. I shook my head vehemently. No way. I barely interact with anyone in person these days. And some of the things they knew. There's just no way. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. Look, I hate to say this, but have you thought about talking to someone? A professional, I mean. Sometimes stress can make us see patterns that aren't really there. I felt a flare of anger. You think I'm making this up? That I'm crazy? That's not what I'm saying. Sarah backpedaled quickly. I just think it might help to get an outside perspective. Someone who can help you process all this. I stormed out of her office, feeling betrayed. Sarah was supposed to believe me, to help me. Instead, she thought I was losing my mind. That night, against my better judgment, I logged back into the forum. Nightwatcher 82 messaged me immediately. There you are. I was getting worried. Your friend Sarah seems nice, by the way. Smart lady. I felt the blood drain from my face. How? How do you know about Sarah? I told you. I see everything. I know everything about you. I know you better than you know yourself. My fingers flew across the keyboard. WHY. Why are you doing this to me? There was a long pause before the reply came. Because I love you. I've always loved you. And soon we'll be together. Really together. A notification popped up on my screen. Nightwatcher 82 was requesting a video call. My cursor hovered over the accept button. Part of me was screaming to shut down the computer, to run, to hide. But a larger part needed to know. Needed to see the face behind the username that had appended my life. With a shaking hand, I clicked accept. The video window opened. For a moment, all I saw was darkness. Then, slowly, a face came into focus. A face I knew intimately. A face I saw every day in the mirror. It was me. But not me as I am now. It was me from 10 years in the future. Eyes wild, hair unkempt. Hello, past me, my future self said, a manic grin splitting her face. We have so much to talk about. As the implications of what I was seeing crashed over me, I realized that my nightmare was only just beginning. The lines between past, present, and future were blurring, and I was caught in the middle of a paradox of my own making. The future me leaned closer to the camera, her grin widening impossibly. Are you ready to become us? And as I stared into my own unhinged eyes, I knew that my life would never be the same again. Story 6. The first time I saw him, I thought nothing of it. Just another late-night customer killing time in a 24-hour convenience store. By the third night, I knew something was terribly wrong. And by the end of the week, I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. My name's Jake, and I work the graveyard shift at Quickmart on the edge of town. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me time to work on my music during the quiet hours. Most nights, it's just me, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the occasional drunk stumbling in for smokes or a microwave burrito. That Tuesday night started like any other. I was restocking the chip aisle, my earbuds in, half listening to a true crime podcast. The bell over the door chimed, and I glanced up, expecting to see one of our regulars. Maybe old Pete from the trailer park, or Sarah from the hospital, finishing her night shift. Instead, I saw him. He was tall, unnaturally so, his head nearly brushing the top of the doorframe. Dressed all in black, slacks, turtleneck, long coat. He should have looked out of place in our dingy little store. But somehow, he seemed to fit. like he'd always been there and I was only just noticing. I pulled out an earbud. "Evening," I called out, aiming for friendly but hearing the uncertainty in my voice. "Let me know if you need any help." He didn't respond, didn't even look my way. Just started walking up and down the aisles with slow, deliberate steps. His gait was off somehow, too smooth, like he was gliding rather than walking. I shrugged it off and went back to stocking, keeping one eye on the security mirror. The guy gave me the creeps, but customers come in all types, right? After about 10 minutes, I heard the bell chime again. I looked up, expecting to see the man leaving, but he was gone. Just gone. I hadn't heard him approach the door, hadn't seen him in the mirror. He'd vanished as silently as he'd appeared. I did a quick lap at the store, telling myself I was just being thorough. No sign of him, no products disturbed or missing. It was like he'd never been there at all. "Get it together, Jake," I muttered to myself. "You're letting that podcast get to you." The rest of the night passed uneventfully, and by the time my replacement showed up at 6 a.m., I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. The next night started normally enough. I nodded to Aisha as she finished her shift, settled in behind the counter, and pulled out my beat-up notebook to work on some lyrics. The hours ticked by, punctuated by the occasional customer and the rhythmic beeping of the door sensor. At exactly 2:37 a.m., I remember checking the clock. The bell chimed. I looked up, and my blood ran cold. It was him, the man from last night. Same height, same all-black outfit, same unnerving, gliding walk. This time, I was determined to interact with him, to prove to myself he was just a normal, if eccentric, customer. "Welcome back," I called out, forcing a smile. "Can I help you find anything tonight?" Again, no response. No acknowledgement at all. He just began his slow circuit of the store, moving with that strange, fluid grace. I watched him in the security mirror, my palms sweating as I gripped the edge of the counter. This time, I wasn't going to let him out of my sight. But somehow, impossibly, I blinked and he was gone. One moment he was there, examining a rack of magazines, and the next, nothing. I hadn't heard the bell, hadn't seen him move toward the exit. My heart pounding, I ran to the door and looked out into the parking lot. Empty. The street beyond was deserted, not a soul in sight. I spent the rest of my shift on edge, jumping at every sound. When Aisha came in to relieve me, I must have looked a mess. "You okay, Jake?" she asked, concern etching her features. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed, but it came out strangled. "Just a weird night," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, have you noticed any unusual customers lately? Really tall guy, all in black?" Aisha shook her head. "Can't say I have." "Why? He give you trouble?" I wanted to tell her everything, to pour out my fears and beg her to believe me, but I knew how it would sound. So I just shook my head and mumbled something about being tired. As I walked home in the grey light of dawn, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe the guy was just really stealthy. Maybe I'd dozed off for a second and missed him leaving. There had to be a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. The third night, I came to work armed with a plan. I'd adjusted the security cameras to cover every inch of the store. I had a small notebook ready to jot down observations. I was going to get to the bottom of this, one way or another. The hours crawled by. Every chime of the bell made me tense up, but it was always just a normal customer. By 2 a.m., I was starting to relax. Maybe it had all been in my head after all. Then, At 2:37 on the dot, the bell chimed. He entered with the same fluid motion, his face as expressionless as ever. This time, though, I was ready. "Sir," I said firmly, stepping out from behind the counter, "I need you to tell me what you want. Why do you keep coming here?" For the first time, he turned to look directly at me. His eyes. God, his eyes. They were completely black, no whites, no iris. Just endless, bottomless pits of darkness. I stumbled backward, my carefully planned speech forgotten. He took a step toward me, and I swear the fluorescent lights flickered. "What are you?" I whispered, my voice cracking. His mouth opened, impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. And then he spoke, his voice a sound that seemed to bypass my ears and echoed directly in my brain. "I am hungry," he said, "and you smell delicious." I ran, bolted for the back room, slammed the door, and wedged a chair under the handle. I could hear him out there, that gliding step coming closer, closer. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone to call 911. No signal. Of course, the doorknob rattled. Once, twice, then silence. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound from the other side. Nothing. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I gathered the courage to peek out. The store was empty. No sign of the man, no evidence he'd ever been there. Except, I rushed to check the security footage, desperate for proof that I wasn't going insane. But the cameras showed nothing. Just me, standing alone in the store, talking to thin air. The rest of the week was a blur of sleepless days and terror-filled nights. He came every night at 2:37 exactly. Sometimes he'd just walk around the store. Sometimes he'd stand motionless, staring at me with those black-holed eyes. And sometimes he'd speak, whisper things that made my skin crawl and my mind recoil. Promises of what he'd do when he finally caught me. Descriptions of other worlds, other realities, where things like him were commonplace. I tried to quit, tried to call in sick, but every time I thought about not going to work, a crippling panic would overwhelm me. Some part of me knew that if I didn't show up, he'd come find me, and that would be so much worse. Last night was the final straw. He came in at 2:37, as always, but this time he brought something with him. A shapeless, writhing mass of shadows that hurt my eyes to look at directly. "A gift," he said, his voice scraping the inside of my skull. "From my world to yours. Soon, very soon, the veil between will fall. And then the real fun begins." The thing pulsed and grew, tendrils of darkness spreading across the floor. Wherever they touched, reality seemed to fray. The linoleum bubbled and warped. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, cycling through impossible colors. I watched in horror as a tendril brushed against a customer who had been browsing the magazines. I hadn't even noticed anyone else was in the store. The man's skin began to ripple, his features melting like wax. He didn't even scream as he was absorbed into the writhing mass. That's when I snapped. I vaulted over the counter and ran, faster than I've ever run in my life. Out the door, down the street, not daring to look back. I'm writing this now from a motel room to states over. I don't know if it'll be enough. I can feel him out there, searching for me. The shadows in the corners of the room seem darker than they should be. The air feels thick, charged with something unnatural. I don't know how much longer I can run. I don't know if there's anywhere I can hide. All I know is that something impossible has found its way into our world, and it's hungry. If you're reading this, please, be careful. watch the shadows. And whatever you do, stay away from convenience stores at 2:37 a.m. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Story 7. The first time I noticed him on my morning commute, I thought it was just a coincidence. By the end of the week, I was convinced he was following me. Now, a month later, I'm trapped in a waking nightmare, and he's always there, watching, waiting, getting closer. My name is Mia, and I've been taking the same subway to work for the past 3 years. It's a 45-minute ride from my apartment in Queens to my office in Manhattan. Usually, it's a mindless part of my day. Just another drone in the sea of commuters. All of us half asleep and clutching our coffee cups like lifelines. That Monday started like any other. I shuffled onto the crowded platform, the air thick with the familiar mix of sweat, brake dust, and stale coffee. As I waited for the train, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you? It was like that, but more intense. I glanced around, trying to be subtle. That's when I saw him for the first time. He was standing about 20 feet away, partially hidden behind a pillar. Tall, maybe 6'2", with a gaunt face and deep-set eyes that seemed to bore right through me. He was wearing a long, grey overcoat that looked out of place in the September heat. Our eyes met for a split second, and I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something wrong about his gaze. Empty, yet somehow hungry. The screech of the arriving train broke the moment. I hurried on board, deliberately choosing a different car than the one he was nearest to. As the doors closed, I couldn't help but look back. He was still there, staring at me through the grimy window as the train pulled away. I shook off the uneasy feeling. New York is full of weirdos, right? By the time I got to work, I'd almost forgotten about it. Almost. The next day, I was more aware of my surroundings as I waited for the train. I told myself I was being silly, but I couldn't help scanning the platform. At first, I didn't see him. I started to relax. Then, just as the train was pulling in, I spotted him. Same coat, same unnerving stare, but this time, he was closer. Maybe 15 feet away. My heart started racing. Once is a coincidence, twice is... What? I got on the train quickly, choosing a packed car where I could lose myself in the crowd. The whole ride, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him materialize among the other passengers. He didn't. But when I got off at my stop, I caught a glimpse of him through the windows of the next car, just standing there, watching me as the train pulled away. By Friday, I was a nervous wreck. He was there every single day, always on the platform when I arrived, always a little closer than the day before. I started varying my schedule, leaving earlier some days, later others. It didn't matter. He was always there, like he knew exactly when I'd arrive. I tried telling my coworker, Jen, about it over lunch. "Girl, you've been watching too many true crime shows," she laughed, stealing a fry from my plate. "It's probably just some guy with a similar commute. The subway's crowded, people end up on the same schedule." I wanted to believe her, but she hadn't seen his eyes, hadn't felt the weight of his stare. "Maybe," I said, forcing a smile. "You're probably right. I'm just being paranoid." But I wasn't. And deep down, I knew it. The following Monday, I decided to drive to work. It would take longer, cost a fortune in parking, but at least I'd feel safe. I practically ran to my car, keys clutched in my fist like a weapon. As I pulled out of my parking spot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My blood ran cold. There he was, standing on the corner, watching my car. How had he found my apartment? How did he know I wouldn't be taking the subway? I peeled out of there, heart pounding. The whole drive, I kept checking the mirror, convinced he'd somehow be right behind me. By the time I got to work, I was shaking so badly I could barely park. I managed to avoid him for the rest of the week by driving, but the constant vigilance was exhausting. I jumped at every shadow, flinched every time a tall man in a coat walked by. My work started to suffer. I couldn't sleep. I was falling apart. On Friday, my car wouldn't start. I spent 20 minutes trying to get it to turn over, knowing I'd be late for work, but terrified of taking the subway. Finally, I had no choice. I'd have to risk it. I hurried to the station, telling myself it would be fine. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe it really had all been in my head. But as I descended the stairs to the platform, I saw him. And this time, he was close. Too close. Standing right by the spot where I usually wait for the train. I froze, one foot on the bottom step. He turned, those dead eyes locking onto mine. And then, for the first time, he smiled. It was a terrible thing, that smile. No warmth, no humanity, just a baring of teeth. I ran, back up the stairs, out of the station, not caring that I was going to miss work, not caring about anything except getting away from him. I could hear footsteps behind me, heavy and deliberate, getting closer. I ducked into a coffee shop, breathing hard. The barista gave me a concerned look. "You okay, miss?" she asked. I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. There's a man following me," I gasped out. "Can I please use your phone? I need to call the police." She nodded, handing me the cordless phone from behind the counter. As I dialed 911 with shaking fingers, I glanced out the window. He was there, standing across the street, staring directly at me. Not moving, not even seeming to breathe, just watching. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, he was gone. They took my statement, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. No crime had been committed, after all. Just a scared woman and a mysterious man who was never where I said he'd be when anyone else was around. I took a cab home, too terrified to even think about public transportation. I doubled the locks on my door, closed all the blinds, and tried to convince myself I was safe. As night fell, I found myself obsessively checking out the window, certain I'd see him standing on the street below. But there was never anyone there. Just empty sidewalks and the occasional passing car. I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke with a start at 3 a.m. Something had pulled me from sleep, some noise or movement. I lay there in the dark, heart racing, straining to hear. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. Slow, deliberate, like bony fingers drumming on the glass. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The tapping continued, growing louder, more insistent. With a burst of adrenaline, I lunged for the bedside lamp. Light flooded the room, and I spun to face the window, expecting to see him there, that terrible smile stretched across his gaunt face. But the window was empty. Just the night sky and the glow of streetlights below. I didn't sleep again that night, or the next. I called in sick to work, too scared to leave my apartment. I ordered groceries for delivery, jumped at every knock on the door. Days blurred together. I stopped answering calls from friends and family. How could I explain what was happening? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was crazy. It's been a week now since I last left my apartment. I've pushed furniture in front of the doors and windows. The blinds stay closed. I live in a self-imposed darkness, jumping at every creak and shadow. but I know it's only a matter of time, because sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I hear it. That slow, steady tapping. And it's not coming from the windows anymore. It's coming from inside the walls. He's found a way in. He's getting closer. Always closer. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. I don't know what he wants or why he chose me. All I know is that soon, very soon, there will be nowhere left to hide. If you're reading this, please be careful on your commute. Pay attention to the faces around you. And if you see a tall man in a grey coat, with eyes like empty wells and a smile that never reaches them, run. Run and don't look back. Because once he starts watching you, he never stops. And he's always getting closer. Story 8. I never thought a dream vacation could turn into a nightmare. But here I am, trapped in an Airbnb that seems to know more about me than I do. Surrounded by impossible reminders of a past I can't escape and a future I'm terrified to face. It all started innocently enough. After a brutal year of non-stop work and a messy breakup, I decided to treat myself to a solo getaway. Just me, my laptop for emergencies, and 2 weeks in a quaint cabin nestled in the Adirondacks. The listing looked perfect. Secluded, rustic charm with modern amenities, and glowing reviews praising the peaceful atmosphere. The drive up was gorgeous, all winding roads and autumn foliage ablaze with color. As I pulled up to the cabin, I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease. The place was even more charming in person, a cozy A-frame with a wide porch and cheerful red shutters. I lugged my bags inside, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke. The interior was everything I'd hoped for. Exposed beams, a massive stone fireplace, and windows that looked out onto nothing but trees. I flopped onto the plush sofa, grinning to myself. This was exactly what I needed. That first day was bliss. I hiked, read by the fire, and even started sketching again, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago. As night fell, I fixed myself a simple dinner and savored the silence. No car horns, no neighbors' music thumping through the walls. Just the crackle of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. I crawled into bed that night, feeling more relaxed than I had in months. The mattress was impossibly comfortable, and I drifted off almost immediately. I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee. For a moment, I was disoriented. Then I remembered where I was and frowned. I definitely hadn't set up the coffee maker last night. Curious, I padded into the kitchen. Sure enough, a fresh pot of coffee was waiting. And not just any coffee. It was my favorite obscure brand from a tiny roaster back home. I know I hadn't packed any. Hell, I'd been meaning to order more for weeks. Okay, weird, I muttered, pouring myself a cup. It tasted perfect. I chalked it up to the owner being incredibly thoughtful, maybe noticing the brand from my social media or something. A bit creepy, sure, but harmless. I pushed the unease aside and set out to enjoy my day. But things only got stranger. That afternoon, as I was rummaging through the closet for extra blankets, I found a sweatshirt from my old university. Not just any sweatshirt. My sweatshirt, the one I'd lost during a move years ago. It even had the small burn mark on the sleeve from a camping trip mishap. My hands shook as I held it. This wasn't possible. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it just looked like mine. A similar style that happened to have a burn in the same spot. But deep down, I knew. This was my sweatshirt, the one I'd mourned the loss of 4 months. I sat on the bed, clutching the sweatshirt, my mind racing. How could this be here? Had someone been in my old apartment, stolen my things? But why, and how did they end up here? in this random Airbnb hundreds of miles from home. I spent the rest of the day on edge, jumping at every creak of the cabin settling. I double-checked the locks, peered out windows, half expecting to see someone watching me from the woods. But there was never anyone there, just trees and silence. That night, I barely slept. I kept the lights on, my phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline. But the only sounds were the wind in the trees and my own ragged breathing. The next morning, things escalated. I stumbled to the bathroom, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep. As I reached for my toothbrush, I froze. There, on the counter, was a framed photo I'd never seen before. But the people in it were horrifyingly familiar. It was me and a man I'd never met. We were on a beach somewhere, sun-kissed and smiling, his arm round my waist. A gleaming ring was visible on my left hand. I dropped the photo, hearing the glass crack as it hit the tile floor. This wasn't just impossible, it was terrifying. The me in the photo looked older, maybe by 5 years or so, and happier than I could ever remember being. My hands shook as I picked up the frame, studying it closely. It wasn't photoshopped, at least not in any way I could detect. The background looked like a real place, waves crashing on a white sand beach. And the man, he was handsome, in a rugged sort of way. Exactly my type, if I was being honest. But I'd never seen him before in my life. And I certainly wasn't married. I spent the next hour tearing the cabin apart, looking for more out-of-place items. I found plenty. A drawer full of clothes in my size, styles I loved but had never owned. A dog-eared novel on the nightstand. A book not due to be released for another year, according to the copyright page. A set of keys with a keychain from a place I'd always dreamed of visiting but had never been. By midday, I was a wreck. I tried calling the Airbnb host, but the number just rang and rang. Same with the customer service line. My cell phone signal kept cutting in and out, making it impossible to get online and check my booking details. I was considering just getting in my car and driving away, future be damned, when I heard it. A key in the lock. The front door opening. "Honey," a man's voice called out. "You would not believe the traffic getting up here. But I brought that wine you like to make up for it." I stood frozen in the middle of the living room as footsteps approached. And then he was there. The man from the photo, older than me, salt and pepper hair, warm brown eyes, currently widening in surprise. "Oh," he said, stopping short. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you'd gotten here already. You look different than your profile picture." He chuckled, setting down a bag and shrugging off his coat. "I'm David. You must be..." "Wait, what was the name, Sarah?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. This couldn't be happening. None of this made sense. "Are you okay?" David asked, his brow furrowing in concern. "You look pale. Here, sit down." He guided me to the couch, his touch gentle but unfamiliar. "Can I get you some water?" I nodded mutely, watching as he moved easily through the kitchen, grabbing a glass like he knew exactly where everything was. "So," he said, handing me the water and settling into an armchair across from me. "Tell me about yourself. I feel like I know you already from all our messages, but it's nice to finally meet in person." I took a long sip of water, my mind whirling. Messages? What messages? I'd never spoken to this man in my life, but he was looking at me so expectantly, so lovingly. A horrible thought began to form. What if? What if I wasn't who I thought I was? What if all my memories of my life, my job, my recent breakup, what if they were the illusion? What if this, here with David, was my real life? "I'm sorry," I managed to croak out. I'm not. I don't. David's face softened. Hey, it's okay. First time jitters, right? I get it. This whole meet your future spouse service is pretty wild. But that's why we're here, right? To see if the algorithms got it right, if we really are perfect for each other, like they say. I felt the room start to spin. Future spouse, algorithms. What the hell was going on? I think, I said, standing on shaky legs, I need some air. I bolted for the door, ignoring David's concerned calls behind me. I ran into the woods, branches whipping at my face, leaves crunching under my feet. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. As I collapsed to the forest floor, gasping for breath, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A notification chime from a phone that wasn't mine. With trembling hands, I pulled the unfamiliar device from my pocket. The lock screen showed a message. Timeline breach detected. Recalibration in progress. Please stand by. The world around me flickered like a glitch in a video game. I saw flashes. The cabin, but different. Older, newer. Versions of myself at different ages. David, sometimes there, sometimes not. As reality fractured around me, one thought crystallized in my mind. I wasn't just in the wrong Airbnb. I was in the wrong time, the wrong life. And something, somewhere, was trying to put me back where I belonged. The question was, where or when was that? And more importantly, who would I be when I got there? The forest faded to white, and I felt myself falling. Story 9. The first time I heard her voice on my voicemail, I thought it was a wrong number. By the third message, I was intrigued. Now, weeks later, I'm trapped in a waking nightmare, and I'm terrified of what will happen when the messages stop. It started on a Tuesday. Nothing special about that day. Just another grey, drizzly Seattle afternoon. I was walking home from my mind-numbing IT job, hood up against the misty rain, when my phone buzzed. Missed call. Probably a telemarketer, I thought. I ducked into the vestibule of my apartment building, shaking off the damp as I checked my voicemail. A woman's voice, soft and slightly hesitant, filled my ear. Hey, it's me. I know you're probably still mad, but I miss you. Can we talk? Please call me back. I frowned, pulling the phone away to check the number. Unfamiliar. Must be a wrong number, I thought. I deleted the message and went about my evening, forgetting all about it. 2 days later, another message from the same number. I drove by our old place today. Remember that little cafe on the corner where we had our first date? It's a vape shop now. Isn't that weird? Anyway, I hope you're doing okay. I worry about you. This time, my curiosity was piqued. Her voice was so familiar somehow, like a song I couldn't quite place. And the way she talked about our old place, it almost felt like she was talking about my life. There was a cafe turned vape shop on my corner, after all. I saved the message, telling myself I'd try to track down the owner of the number later. But I forgot about it again in the rush of work and life. The third message came exactly a week after the first. This time, her voice was different, urgent, scared. Please, you have to listen to me. I know you don't remember, but you're in danger. They're coming for you. For us. You have to. The message cut off abruptly. My heart was racing. This didn't sound like a wrong number anymore. This sounded like... Well, I didn't know what it sounded like, but it scared the hell out of me. I tried calling the number back, but it just rang and rang before going to a generic voicemail. I left a message. Hi, you've been leaving messages for me, but I think you have the wrong number. I'm not who you think I am. Please stop calling. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying her messages in my head, trying to place her voice. It was so achingly familiar, but I couldn't figure out why. I'd never had a serious girlfriend, never lived with anyone. So who was this woman who seemed to know so much about me? The next day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept jumping every time my phone buzzed, half expecting another message. But nothing came. It was 3 days before I heard from her again. This time, it was a text. I know you're confused. I'm sorry. But please don't delete these messages. Your life depends on remembering. I stared at my phone, a chill running down my spine. This was getting too weird. I should just block the number, I thought. Forget this ever happened. But I couldn't. Something about her voice, the desperation in her words, it got under my skin. I found myself obsessively replaying the voicemails, searching for clues. That's when I started noticing things. Little details in her messages that matched my life too closely to be coincidence. She mentioned a scar on my left knee from a childhood bike accident. I have that scar. She talked about my favorite book, an obscure sci-fi novel I've read a dozen times, but have never discussed with anyone. How could she know these things? The messages kept coming, growing more frequent and more desperate. Sometimes she'd reminisce about things we'd supposedly done together, vacations I'd never taken, moments I had no memory of. Other times, she'd issue cryptic warnings. Don't trust what they tell you. Your memories are a lie. We were happy once, before they took you. I started losing sleep, jumping at shadows. At work, I caught myself Googling things like false memory syndrome and government mind control experiments. I knew how crazy it sounded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. About 2 weeks in, things escalated. I was walking home from work, same as always, when I saw her. Just a glimpse, across the street, a woman with long dark hair, staring right at me. Our eyes met for a split second, and I felt a jolt of recognition. It was her. I knew it, even though I'd never seen her before. I started to cross the street, my heart pounding. But a bus passed between us, and when it was gone, so was she. I spent an hour searching the area, but there was no trace of her. That night, another voicemail. I'm sorry I scared you today. I shouldn't have let you see me. It's not safe. But I had to know. I had to see if there was any recognition in your eyes. There was, wasn't there? You felt it too. I played the message over and over, my hands shaking. This was insane. I needed help. But who could I tell? Who would believe me? The next day, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face the outside world, couldn't bear the thought of seeing her again. I spent the day poring over the messages, making notes, trying to find some pattern, some explanation that made sense. As night fell, my phone buzzed. A new message. This one was different. Her voice was calm, resigned. I'm done hiding. Meet me at Vol.25, by the water tower, midnight tonight. I'll explain everything. Please come. I love you. I stared at my phone, my mind reeling. This was my chance to get answers, to finally understand what the hell was going on. But it could also be a trap. What if she was just some obsessed stalker? Or worse, but deep down, I knew I had to go. I had to know the truth. The park was eerily quiet as I approached the water tower. Fog had rolled in, muffling the sounds of the city. My footsteps seemed too loud on the damp grass. And then I saw her, standing beneath the tower, illuminated by a single flickering streetlight. She turned as I approached, and I felt that same jolt of recognition. I knew her. Somehow, impossibly, I knew her. "You came," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Oh God, you really came." I stopped a few feet away, my heart pounding. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "How do you know so much about me?" She took a step closer, her eyes searching my face. "You really don't remember, do you?" "They did a thorough job this time." "Remember what?" I demanded. "What are you talking about?" She reached out, her hand hovering near my cheek but not quite touching. "I'm your wife, Jake. Or I was, before they took you. Before they erased everything." I stumbled backward, shaking my head. "No, that's impossible. I've never been married. I've never even—" "I know how it sounds," she interrupted. "But please, just listen. We don't have much time." And then she told me a story so insane, so terrifying, that it couldn't possibly be true. Except it explained everything. She talked about a secret government program, time travel experiments, how I had been a key researcher, how he had fallen in love despite the rules against fraternization, how I had discovered something I shouldn't have, something that made me a liability. "They couldn't kill you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You knew too much. So they did the next best thing. They erased you, sent you back in time and rewrote your entire history, gave you a whole new life, new memories." I wanted to laugh, to tell her she was crazy, but I couldn't, because deep down, in some part of me I didn't even know existed, I felt the truth of her words. "If that's true," I said slowly, "then how do you remember? Why didn't they erase you, too?" A sad smile crossed her face. "They tried, but our connection, it was too strong. Pieces of me kept bleeding through. That's how I found you. I've been leaving messages across time, hoping one would reach you, hoping you'd remember." As she spoke, images flashed through my mind. Memories that couldn't be mine, but felt more real than anything I'd ever known. Me, in a lab coat, working on impossible machines. Her smile across a crowded room. Our first kiss, stolen in a supply closet. Our wedding, small and secret. "Oh God," I breathed, staggering under the weight of it all. "It's true. It's all true." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "We have to go, Jake. They'll know I've contacted you. They'll be coming." As if on cue, I heard the sound of tires screeching nearby. Flashlight beams cut through the fog. "Run!" she yelled, grabbing my hand. We took off into the night, my mind reeling, my heart pounding. I didn't know what would happen next, didn't know if we could ever truly escape. But I knew one thing for certain: my life would never be the same again. As we ran, hand in hand, into an uncertain future, I realized that the nightmare of the past few weeks had only been the beginning. The real terror and the real adventure was just starting. And somewhere, in some other time, a phone was ringing, carrying a message across the years. "Hey, it's me. I know you're probably still mad, but I miss you. Can we talk?
Please call me back."
Single quote, story 10. The moment I realized I'd been driving on this road for far too long was the moment I knew I was in trouble. What should have been a quick shortcut had turned into an endless loop. And with each passing mile, I felt myself slipping further from reality. It started innocently enough. I was on my way to my sister's wedding, running late as usual. The GPS on my phone suggested a detour to avoid traffic. Some back road I'd never heard of. "Saves you 30 minutes, the cheerful robotic voice promised. I didn't think twice before taking the exit. At first, the road seemed normal enough. 2 lanes, a bit narrow, winding through dense forest. The trees pressed close on either side, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the late afternoon. Sunlight into dappled patterns on the asphalt. I rolled down the windows, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the smell of pine. An hour in, I started to get uneasy. The road hadn't changed at all. Still the same curves, the same trees, the same everything. I hadn't passed a single car or seen any signs of civilization. My phone had lost signal a while back, the GPS app frozen on that last turn. "Come on, Ellie," I muttered to myself. "You're just stressed about the wedding. Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the road, I realized I should have reached my destination long ago. The gas gauge was dipping dangerously low, and my stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I decided to turn around, go back the way I came. But every time I thought I recognized a bend in the road or a particular tree, it would shift somehow, becoming unfamiliar again. It was like the forest was rearranging itself behind me, erasing my path. Night fell completely, and with it came a thick, unnatural fog. It rolled in from the trees, blanketing the road in swirling white. I slowed to a crawl, straining to see more than a few feet ahead. The headlights seemed to be swallowed by the mist, barely penetrating the gloom. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in my rearview mirror. Just for a second, but unmistakable. A face, pale and gaunt, peering out from the fog behind my car. I yelped, swerving slightly before regaining control. When I looked again, there was nothing there. "You're seeing things," I told myself. Knuckles white on the steering wheel. Just tricks of the light and too much caffeine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone on this road anymore. The next few hours, or was it days? Time seemed to lose all meaning, were a blur of increasing terror. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of shadowy figures darting between the trees. Other times, I'd swear I heard voices whispering just beneath the hum of the engine, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I tried everything I could think of to escape. I took every turn-off I saw, but they all led back to the same endless road. I tried to drive off into the forest, but the trees would suddenly press closer, forming an impenetrable wall. Once, in desperation, I even tried to crash the car, thinking maybe the impact would jolt me out of whatever nightmare this was. But at the last second, the guardrail I was aiming for simply wasn't there anymore. The gas gauge hovered on empty for hours, defying all logic. The clock on the dashboard kept resetting itself, jumping from 11:59 to 12 o'clock over and over. I was trapped in a bubble of unreality, and I was starting to lose hope of ever escaping. It was during one of these resets, as the clock ticked over to midnight yet again, that I saw the hitchhiker. He was standing on the side of the road, thumb out, looking for all the world like a normal guy just trying to catch a ride. But something about him made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the way the fog seemed to part around him, or how his eyes reflected my headlights like an animal's. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but I was so desperate for any kind of human contact, any break in the monotony of this nightmare road, that I found myself slowing down. The hitchhiker smiled as I pulled up beside him. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Need a ride?" I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. He nodded, still grinning that unsettling grin. "Been waiting for you, Ellie," he said as he opened the passenger door. I froze. I hadn't told him my name. Before I could react, he was in the car, door slamming shut behind him. The temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees instantly. "Hell, do you know my name?" I stammered, gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. He turned to look at me, and I had to stifle a scream. His face was wrong. Features that had seemed normal at first glance were now twisted, inhuman. His eyes were black pits, his mouth a too-wide slash filled with needle-sharp teeth. "We know everything about you, Ellie," he said. His voice a rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We've been waiting so long for you to join us." I stomped on the gas pedal, tires squealing as we shot forward. The hitchhiker laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming wind. "You can't escape," he said, reaching out with a hand that was more claw than human appendage. "This road goes on forever, and it's hungry. So hungry." I swerved wildly, trying to shake him off, but he clung to the seat with impossible strength. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows like a living thing trying to get in. "What do you want?" I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "Why are you doing this?" The hitchhiker's grin widened impossibly. "We want you, Ellie. Your fear, your despair, your delicious humanity. The road brought you to us, and now you'll feed it forever." As he spoke, I noticed something horrifying. The interior of the car was changing. The seats were becoming gnarled and woody, like tree bark. Vines were creeping across the dashboard. The steering wheel was warping in my hands, becoming more like a twisted branch than a man-made object. I looked down at my hands and choked back a sob. My skin was taking on a greenish hue, fingers elongating into branch-like appendages. I could feel roots growing from my feet, burrowing into the floorboards. "No," I whimpered. "Please, no." The hitchhiker laughed again, his form melting and shifting until he was nothing more than a mass of writhing shadows. "Welcome home, Ellie," he hissed. "Welcome to the endless road." The car, no longer recognizable as such, careened off the road and into the forest. But there was no impact. The trees simply parted, welcoming us in. I felt myself being absorbed into the vehicle, into the forest, becoming one with the hungry, living road. My last human thought was of my sister's wedding. How long ago had that been? Days, years, centuries. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except the road, the endless, hungry road. Now I wait. I wait and I watch for the next unlucky traveler to take a wrong turn, to accept a suggested detour from a GPS that's no longer under human control. And when they come, because they always come, I'll be there. A familiar face by the roadside, firm out, waiting to welcome them to their new home. So if you're ever driving late at night and your GPS suggests a shortcut down an unfamiliar road, think twice. That quick detour might just lead you somewhere you can never leave. And if you see a hitchhiker standing in the fog, keep driving. Because on the endless road, a ride might cost you everything. Story 11. The first time I noticed my reflection acting strangely, I thought I was just overtired. By the third night, I knew something was terribly wrong. Now, a week later, I'm trapped in a waking nightmare, watching helplessly as my mirror image takes over my life. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd been up late finishing a project for work, running on nothing but coffee and stubbornness. As I stumbled into the bathroom to brush my teeth, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror that didn't quite match my own. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes. When I looked again, everything seemed normal. Just my own tired face staring back at me, dark circles under my eyes and hair a mess. "Get it together, Zoe," I muttered to myself. "This is what happens when you pull all-nighters at 35. I brushed it off, crawling into bed and falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. But the next morning, as I was doing my makeup, I saw it again. A flicker of movement, just at the edge of my vision. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Just my own reflection, looking as spooked as I felt. The third night was when things got really weird. I was getting ready for bed, going through my usual routine. As I leaned in close to the mirror to remove my eye makeup, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My reflection winked at me. I jerked back, heart pounding. That was impossible. I hadn't winked. I was sure of it. "Hello," I said, feeling ridiculous for talking to a mirror. "Is someone there?" For a long moment, nothing happened. I was just about to laugh it off as an overtired hallucination, when my reflection's lips curled into a smile I wasn't making. I screamed, stumbling backward and slamming into the wall behind me. In the mirror, my reflection stayed perfectly still, that unnerving smile still in place. "This isn't real," I whispered, squeezing my eyes shut. "This can't be real." When I opened them again, my reflection was back to normal, mirroring my terrified expression. But I knew what I'd seen. Something was very, very wrong. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, lights on, too scared to look at any reflective surface. When dawn finally broke, I called in sick to work. There was no way I could face the world feeling this unhinged. As the day wore on, I managed to convince myself that it had all been some kind of waking dream. Stress-induced hallucinations, maybe. I'd been working too hard, not sleeping enough. That had to be it. By evening, I'd worked up the courage to face the bathroom mirror again. I stood in front of it, heart racing, and forced myself to look. Everything seemed normal at first. Just me, pale and nervous, staring at my own reflection. I let out a shaky breath, starting to relax. Then my reflection raised its hand and waved at me. I didn't move a muscle, but there it was, clear as day. My mirror image, moving independently of me, a friendly smile on its face that I definitely wasn't making. "What are you?" I whispered, unable to look away. My reflection's lips moved, but I couldn't hear anything. It was like watching a TV on mute. I leaned closer, trying to make out what it was saying. Suddenly, a hand shot out of the mirror, grabbing my wrist. I screamed, trying to pull away, but the grip was iron tight. It was my own hand, but not. The skin was cooler, slightly too smooth, like a doll's. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I wrenched my arm free and ran from the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. I spent the night at a friend's place, making up some story about a plumbing leak. But I couldn't hide forever. The next day, I had to go back. I had work, responsibilities. Life doesn't stop just because you're being haunted by your own reflection. I tried to go about my day normally, avoiding mirrors as much as possible, but it was impossible to escape them entirely. Every reflective surface became a potential threat. Windows, computer screens, even the polished chrome of the office coffee machine. I caught glimpses of movement, flashes of a smile that wasn't mine. My co-workers started to notice something was off. "You feeling okay, Zoe?" my cubicle neighbor, Tim, asked. "You seem jumpy." I forced a laugh. "Just too much caffeine, I think. You know how I get." But I could see the concern in his eyes. I wasn't fooling anyone. As the days passed, things escalated. My reflection became bolder, its movements more pronounced. Sometimes I'd walk by a mirror and see myself doing completely different things. Reading a book I didn't own, talking on a phone that wasn't in my hand. I started covering up all the mirrors in my apartment, but that only seemed to make things worse. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find the covers removed, the mirrors exposed. Once, I could have sworn I heard laughter coming from the bathroom, but when I worked up the courage to look, there was nothing there but my own terrified face. A week after it all started, things came to a head. I was at work, in the middle of a presentation to the entire department. As I clicked through my slides, I caught a glimpse of movement on the large screen behind me. My blood ran cold. There, projected for everyone to see, was my reflection. But while I stood frozen in horror, the me on the screen continued the presentation smoothly, gesturing and speaking with a confidence I certainly didn't feel. I spun around, but the screen showed only my regular PowerPoint slides. When I turned back to face my colleagues, they were all staring at me with concern. "Zoe," my boss said gently, "are you all right?" You stopped mid-sentence. I opened my mouth to explain, to tell them what I'd seen, but no words came out. How could I possibly make them understand? I'm not feeling well," I managed to stammer out. "I'm sorry, I need to." I didn't even finish the sentence before bolting from the room. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling. This couldn't go on. I needed help. But who could I turn to? Who would believe me? As I walked into my apartment, I noticed something odd. The mirror in the entryway, which I distinctly remembered covering with a sheet, was exposed. In my reflection, it was smiling at me. "No," I whispered. "Please, no." My reflection's smile widened. It raised a hand and beckoned to me, inviting me closer. Against my better judgment, I approached the mirror. As I drew near, I felt a strange pulling sensation, like a strong wind trying to sweep me off my feet. My reflection reached out, its hand passing through the surface of the mirror like it was water. I tried to back away, but it was too late. Those two smooth fingers closed around my wrist, and with a sharp tug, I was pulled forward. I expected to slam into the glass, but instead, I passed through it like smoke. For a moment, there was nothing but cold and darkness. Then, suddenly, I was on the other side, looking out. I was in the mirror, and my reflection, the thing that had been pretending to be me, was out in the real world. "Thank you," it said, using my voice. "I've been waiting so long for this." I tried to scream, to move, but I was frozen. I could only watch in horror as the thing that looked like me picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts. "Hello, Tim," it said, its imitation of me flawless. "About that drink you've been wanting to get. I'm free tonight, if you are." As it walked away, leaving me trapped in the mirror, I realized the true horror of my situation. This thing wasn't just going to take over my life. It was going to live it better than I ever had. And I was powerless to stop it. Now, I wait and I watch. I see through every mirror, every reflective surface. I watch as this imposter lives my life, excelling at my job, charming my friends, doing all the things I was always too afraid to do. Sometimes, late at night, it comes and stands in front of the mirror. It smiles at me, but there's no warmth in its eyes. "Isn't this better?" it asks. "I'm giving you the life you always wanted. You should be thanking me, but all I can do is silently scream, hoping that someday someone will look closely enough to see the real me trapped behind the glass. Hoping that someone will realize that reflections shouldn't move on their own. So if you're reading this, please be careful around mirrors. And if you ever catch your reflection doing something you're not, run, and don't look back. Because you never know when the thing in the mirror might decide it wants to trade places." Story 12. The crackling of the radio woke me from a fitful sleep, its static-filled voice carrying a message that would change my life forever. "This is not a test," it said. "The forest is alive, and it's coming for us all. My name is Jack, and until a week ago, I was just another bored forest fire lookout, spending my summer in splendid isolation atop a rickety tower in the middle of nowhere. Now, I'm not sure if I'm the last sane man in the world, or if I've completely lost my mind." It all started on a sweltering July afternoon. The kind of day where the air feels thick enough to chew and the horizon shimmers with heat haze. I was slouched in my chair, feet up on the desk, half-heartedly scanning the endless sea of green below for any signs of smoke. The radio beside me suddenly erupted in a burst of static, making me jump. I fumbled for the dial, trying to clear up the signal. Repeat, all lookouts. Mandatory evacuation. Unexplained phenomena. The voice faded in and out, obscured by interference. I frowned, leaning closer. Evacuation? That was unusual. We sometimes got pulled out for approaching storms, but the sky was clear as far as I could see. "This is Lookout Tower 7, I said into the mic. "Can you repeat that last message?" "Over." Nothing but static answered me. I tried again, switching frequencies, but got the same result. An uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. That's when I noticed the silence. Living in the forest, you get used to constant background noise. Wind in the trees, birds calling, insects buzzing. But now there was nothing. The world outside my tower window seemed to be holding its breath. I grabbed my binoculars, scanning the tree line. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I focused in, adjusting the lens. What I saw made my blood run cold. A tree, a massive, ancient pine, was moving. Not swaying in the wind, but actually uprooting itself, its branches twisting like tentacles as it pulled free from the earth. I blinked hard, sure I must be seeing things. But when I looked again, it was still happening. And it wasn't just one tree. All across the forest, trees were coming to life, their roots becoming grotesque, wood-aunt bark legs. "What the hell?" I muttered, unable to tear my eyes away from the impossible sight. The radio crackled to life again, making me jump. This time, the voice came through, clear as day. "This is not a test. The forest is alive, and it's coming for us all. God help us." Then, silence. Complete and utter silence. For a long moment, I just stood there, trying to process what I'd seen and heard. It couldn't be real. Trees don't just get up and walk. It had to be some kind of mass hallucination, or a very elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew. This was real, and it was only the beginning. The next few days were a blur of increasing terror and isolation. I tried repeatedly to radio for help, to contact other lookout towers, even to reach emergency services on my personal cell phone. Nothing but static on all frequencies. From my vantage point, I watched as the forest below me changed. Trees uprooted themselves and moved in eerie, coordinated patterns. Some seemed to be forming barriers, while others moved towards distant roads and towns I could barely make out on the horizon. On the third day, I saw the first human casualty. A helicopter, probably search and rescue, flew over the forest. As it passed above a particularly dense cluster of trees, branches shot up like spears, impaling the aircraft. I watched in horror as it spiraled down, disappearing into the canopy in a plume of smoke. That night, I heard screaming in the distance. Human screams, filled with terror and pain. I huddled in my tower, lights off, barely daring to breathe. By the fifth day, my supplies were running low. I'd been rationing my food and water, but I knew I couldn't hold out much longer. The idea of trying to leave the tower filled me with dread. But the alternative, slowly starving while watching the world be consumed by a hostile, living forest, seemed even worse. I spent that night preparing for my escape attempt. I packed a small bag with what little food I had left, a first aid kit, and a flare gun. As an afterthought, I grabbed the radio too. It hadn't worked in days, but it was my only link to the outside world. As dawn broke on the 6th day, I steeled myself for the descent. The ladder down from the tower seemed to stretch endlessly, each rung a step closer to the nightmare below. I was halfway down when I heard it. A deep, groaning sound, like wood straining under immense pressure. I looked down and my heart nearly stopped. The trees at the base of the tower were moving, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. As I watched, frozen in terror, they began to entwine around the tower's legs, squeezing. The whole structure shuddered. I clung to the ladder, knuckles white, as the tower swayed alarmingly. No, 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 I muttered, looking frantically for an escape route. But I was trapped. Too high to jump, too low to climb back up before the tower fell. With a deafening crack, one of the tower's supports gave way. The world tilted crazily, and I lost my grip. For a sickening moment, I was in free fall. Then, pain. Blinding, all-encompassing pain as I crashed through branches on my way down. I hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. For a long moment, I just lay there, dazed and struggling to breathe. Every inch of me hurt, but I was alive. A shadow fell over me, and I looked up to see the twisted face of what had once been an oak tree looming above me. Its bark had rearranged into a crude approximation of eyes and a mouth, filled with splinter-sharp teeth. I scrambled backward, ignoring the screaming protest of my battered body. My hand closed around a branch, and I swung it desperately at the approaching tree creature. To my shock, it recoiled, a high-pitched keening sound emanating from its bark mouth. I looked at the branch in my hand and realized it was on fire. I must have struck my emergency flare gun when I fell. Hope surged through me. Fire, of course. These things were still trees, after all. I struggled to my feet, waving the burning branch like a torch. The tree creatures retreated, their wooden faces contorted in what looked unsettlingly like fear. I didn't waste any time. I ran, stumbling and limping, using the burning branch to clear a path through the hostile forest. Behind me, I could hear the groaning and creaking of the trees giving chase, but the fire kept them at bay. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare stop. As the sun began to set, I finally saw something that made my heart leap. A road. With a final burst of energy, I sprinted for the asphalt. As soon as my feet hit the road, the pursuing sounds stopped. I turned to see the forest looming at the edge of the pavement, trees swaying agitatedly, but not crossing onto the man-made surface. I sank to my knees, gasping for breath, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving me shaking and spent. That's when I heard it, the rumble of an engine. A battered pickup truck came around the bend, screeching to a halt as the driver saw me. An old man leaned out the window, his eyes wide with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "You from the forest?" he asked, voice gruff. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He jerked his thumb towards the truck bed. "Get in, quick," for they changed their minds about the road. I didn't need to be told twice. As we drove away, I watched the forest recede in the rearview mirror. The trees seemed to be watching us go, their branches waving in a wind that didn't exist. "Name's Bill," the old man said as we sped down the empty road. "Guess you and me are some of the lucky ones. Ain't many of us left now." "What? What's happening?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse. Bill's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, filled with a grim knowledge. End of the world, son. Lease, end of our world. Mother Nature's finally fighting back. As we drove into an uncertain future, The radio on Bill's dashboard suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, a familiar message played. This is not a test. The forest is alive, and it's coming for us all. I realized then that my nightmare was far from over. It was spreading, consuming everything in its path. And we were nothing but refugees in a world that no longer belonged to us. The war between man and nature had begun, and nature was winning. Story 13. The first time I noticed a book out of place, I thought nothing of it. By the third night, I knew the library was trying to tell me something. Now, a week later, I'm trapped in a nightmare of words and whispers, and I fear I may never escape. My name is Sarah, and until recently, I was just another librarian in a small-town library. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, and the biggest excitement is usually a new bestseller hitting the shelves. But now, I'm not sure if I'm uncovering a terrifying secret or losing my mind. Maybe both. It started on a Tuesday evening, just before closing. I was reshelving returns, humming to myself in the quiet of the nearly empty library. As I reached to place a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird back in its spot, I paused. Something wasn't right. The books around it were all wrong. Instead of Harper Lee's contemporaries, I found myself staring at a row of medical textbooks. I blinked hard. Sure, I must have wandered into the wrong section without realizing it. But no, this was definitely fiction. A through M, weird, I muttered, quickly rearranging the books to their proper order. I made a mental note to talk to the new page about being more careful with shelving. But the next morning, the medical books were back. Not just back, but multiplied. An entire shelf of anatomy texts and surgical manuals had appeared overnight in the middle of general fiction. Okay, this isn't funny anymore, I said aloud, my voice echoing in the empty library. We weren't open yet, and I was alone in the building. Whoever's doing this, knock it off. No one answered, of course. Just the usual creaks and settling sounds of the old building. I spent the next hour reshelving, growing increasingly unsettled. It wasn't just the medical books. All over the library, I found sections subtly altered. Cookbooks mixed in with true crime. Children's picture books nestled between dense philosophical texts. By the time I finished, I was sweating and on edge. This was too elaborate to be a prank, and there was a pattern to it, I'm sure. I just couldn't quite grasp it yet. That night, I dreamed of the library. In my dream, the books were whispering, their pages rustling like thousands of paper tongues. They were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand. I woke up gasping, the echo of those whispers still in my ears. The third day is when things got really weird. I came in early, determined to get to the bottom of the mysterious reshelving. As I unlocked the main doors, a gust of wind rushed past me, ruffling my hair and sending a chill down my spine. Inside, the library was dark and silent. I flicked on the lights, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw the shadows move, slithering back into the corners like startled animals. "Get it together, Sarah," I muttered, shaking my head. Lack of sleep was clearly getting to me. I made my way to the reference desk, ready to start my usual morning routine. But as I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The desk was covered in books, not neatly stacked, but spread out in a bizarre pattern. Titles faced up, forming words and phrases. Beneath the words "truth," "hidden," "find us." My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. This was impossible. I'd locked up myself last night. No one could have gotten in. Unless... No. I shut down that train of thought immediately. Books don't move themselves. There had to be a logical explanation. With shaking hands, I began to clear the desk. carefully noting down each title and its position before reshelving it. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of paper, every creak of the old building made me jump. By the time I finished, I had filled several pages of my notebook with what looked like nonsense. Strings of book titles that seemed to form fragmented sentences. The Hidden Life of Trees, Speak Memory in Cold Blood. Brave New World Order. 1984, Fahrenheit 451. The Standstill, Alice in Wonderland. I stared at the words until they blurred, trying to decipher their meaning. Was someone trying to send a message? Or was I seeing patterns where there were none? The rest of the day passed in a haze of paranoia. Every time I turned my back, I could swear I heard the soft thump of books moving. More than once, I spun around, certain I'd catch someone in the act of rearranging the shelves. But there was never anyone there. My co-workers noticed something was off. "You feeling okay, Sarah?" asked Mike, our IT guy. "You seem a little jumpy." I forced a laugh. "Just too much coffee, I think. You know how I get." But I could see the concern in his eyes. I wasn't fooling anyone. As closing time approached, I found myself dreading the idea of locking up alone. I considered asking Mike to stay late, but how could I explain? "Hey, I think the books are alive and trying to communicate with me. Mind sticking around?" Yeah, that would go over well. So I put on a brave face, waved goodbye to the last of the staff, and began my closing routine. Everything seemed normal at first. I reshelved the last of the returns, straightened the chairs, made sure the computers were shut down. It wasn't until I reached to turn off the main light that I noticed it. A book, lying open on a reading table. I was sure I'd cleared all the tables earlier. As I approached, I realized it was a book on cryptography. It was open to a page about bibliomancy, the practice of divination using books. A chill ran down my spine. This couldn't be a coincidence. I reached out to close the book, but as my hand touched the page, all the lights in the library went out at once. For a moment, I was frozen in total darkness. Then, slowly, an eerie glow began to emanate from the shelves. It was coming from the books themselves, a soft phosphorescence that illuminated the library in a ghostly light. And in that light, I saw them move. Books began to slide off shelves of their own accord, floating through the air as if carried by invisible hands. They circled around me, their pages fluttering, filling the air with a sound like thousands of whispering voices. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was rooted to the spot. The books pressed closer, their whispers growing louder, more insistent, and suddenly I could understand them. They were saying my name over and over. "Sarah, Sarah, Sarah, what do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. The books rustled more intensely, their glow brightening. Pages flipped rapidly, and in the flashes of text, I began to see a message form. "We are the keepers of hidden truths. You have been chosen," read us. "Become one with the story as the last word formed." The books surged forward, enveloping me in a whirlwind of paper and binding. I felt myself being lifted off my feet, surrounded by swirling text and glowing pages. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was right, somehow. This was where I belonged. As the books pressed closer, I began to feel myself changing. My skin took on the texture of paper, my bones hardening into book spines. Words flowed through my veins instead of blood. I was becoming one with the library, with every story ever told and every truth ever hidden. The last thing I remember thinking as a human was, I finally understand. Now, I am everywhere and nowhere. I am every book in this library, every word on every page. I hold the secrets of the universe between my covers, and I wait. I wait for the next librarian, the next curious mind ready to unlock the truths hidden beneath the words. So, if you're reading this, be careful in libraries after dark. Pay attention to the books around you. And if you ever see titles rearranging themselves, forming messages just for you, run before you to become part of the story. Because once the library chooses you, there's no escape. Only endless pages, infinite words, and the whispers of hidden truths echoing for eternity. Story 14. The first time I saw my doppelganger, I thought it was a trick of the light. By the third sighting, I knew something was terribly wrong. Now, weeks later, I'm trapped in a waking nightmare, watching as someone, or something, that looks exactly like me slowly takes over my life. My name's Alex, and until recently, I was just another face in the crowd. An ordinary guy with an ordinary job, living in an ordinary apartment complex in the suburbs of Seattle. But now, I'm not sure who or what I am anymore. It started on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was rushing to catch the bus, coffee in one hand, umbrella awkwardly clutched in the other. As I hurried past the reflective glass of the apartment lobby, something made me pause. For just a split second, I could have sworn I saw myself already outside, calmly walking away from the building. I blinked hard, shaking my head. Lack of sleep and too much caffeine, I told myself. But as I pushed through the lobby doors, a chill ran down my spine. That had nothing to do with the damp Seattle weather. I managed to push the incident out of my mind for a few days. Life went on. Work, home, sleep, repeat. But then it happened again. I was doing laundry in the basement of our complex late one night. The place always gave me the creeps. Flickering fluorescent lights, the constant hum of ancient washing machines, and that musty underground smell. As I was loading the dryer, movement caught my eye. I looked up, expecting to see another night owl doing their laundry. Instead, I saw myself, not in a mirror or reflection, but standing at the far end of the room. Same faded jeans and grey hoodie I was wearing. Same messy brown hair. But this other me was just standing there, staring and smiling. A smile I knew I wasn't making. I blinked, and he was gone. Just the empty laundry room and the thump 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 of my clothes in the dryer. My heart was racing as I gathered my things and practically ran back to my apartment. I double-checked every lock, peered out every window, but there was no sign of my mysterious double. "You're losing it, Alex," I muttered to myself, running a shaky hand through my hair. Maybe it's time to lay off the true crime podcasts before bed. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't my imagination. Something impossible was happening. The third time I saw my doppelganger was when things got really weird. I was at work, mindlessly entering data into spreadsheets, when a commotion by the elevators caught my attention. I heard my name being called, congratulations being offered. Curious, I poked my head out of my cubicle, and there I was. But not Mimi, the other me. Shaking hands with my boss, grinning ear to ear. "Alex here just landed the Stevenson account," my boss was saying, clapping not me on the back. "Biggest deal of the quarter. Looks like someone's in line for a promotion." I stood there, frozen in shock. The Stevenson account. I'd never even heard of it, and I certainly hadn't landed any deals. As if sensing my gaze, the other Alex looked directly at me. Our eyes met, and I felt a chill run through my entire body. His smile widened, showing too many teeth. Then he winked, a conspiratorial gesture that made my blood run cold. I ducked back into my cubicle, heart pounding. This was insane. There was a person out there who looked exactly like me, and he was, what? Taking over my job. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, jumping every time someone walked past my desk. I kept expecting my boss to come by, to call me out for the imposter I apparently was, but nothing happened. It was like the encounter by the elevators had never occurred. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my small apartment, jumping at every sound. The wind outside sounded like whispers, the creaks of the old building like footsteps. I found myself obsessively checking the locks, peering out the peephole, half expecting to see myself staring back. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I needed answers, and I knew just where to start. I called in sick to work and set up camp in the lobby of our apartment complex. If this thing that looked like me was really living here, I'd catch it coming or going. Hours ticked by. I got plenty of strange looks from my neighbors, but no sign of my double. As the sun began to set, I was about to give up when I saw him. Me, but not me. Walking calmly across the lobby, nodding hello to the doorman like he belonged there. I sprang to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Hey," I shouted. "Stop right there." The other me turned, that same unsettling smile spreading across his face. Then he bolted for the stairs. I gave chase, my heart pounding in my ears. Up the stairs we went, flight after flight. I was gasping for breath, but my doppelganger seemed tireless. Finally, we burst out onto the roof. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The city spread out below us. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to catch my breath. "What do you want?" The other me turned slowly, still smiling that too wide smile. When he spoke, his voice was mine, but wrong somehow. Like hearing yourself on a recording, but more unsettling. "I'm you, Alex," he said. "The better you. The you that you always wanted to be." I shook my head, backing away. "That's impossible. You can't be me." He took a step closer. "But I am. I'm the you that gets the promotion. The you that finally asks out that cute barista. The you that takes risks, that lives life to the fullest." Single quote, with each word, he advanced, and I retreated. My back hit the low wall at the edge of the roof. I could feel the drop behind me, the wind tugging at my clothes. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. His smile faltered for the first time. "Because you're wasting this life, Alex. All that potential squandered. Someone needed to step in, to do what you couldn't. So you're what? Replacing me?" He shrugged, a gesture so familiar it made my skin crawl. In a manner of speaking. "But don't worry. Soon, there won't be any difference between us at all." He reached out, his hand inches from my face. I could see now that his skin was wrong. Too smooth, almost plastic. His eyes, which I had thought were identical to mine, had no depth to them. They were flat, lifeless. "What are you?" I whispered. His grin widened impossibly, splitting his face almost in half. "I'm the future, Alex. Your future, our future." I don't remember deciding to move. One moment I was pressed against the wall. The next I was ducking under his outstretched arm, running for the roof access door. Behind me, I heard laughter. My laughter, but distorted, inhuman. "You can't run from yourself, Alex." The thing with my face called out, "I'll always find you." I flew down the stairs, taking them 2, 3 at a time. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, lungs burning, legs shaking. That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't been back to my apartment, haven't been to work. I'm writing this from a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, jumping at every sound, peering out the window at every passing car. I've seen reports about myself on the local news. Alex Marshall, the up-and-coming young professional. Alex Marshall, volunteering at the animal shelter. Alex Marshall, living my life better than I ever did. I don't know how much longer I can run. I don't know if there's anywhere I can hide. All I know is that something impossible has invaded my life, stolen my face, my identity, and it's only a matter of time before it finds me again. So if you're reading this, please be careful. Watch out for people who seem too familiar. And if you ever catch a glimpse of yourself doing something you know you're not, run, and don't look back. Because somewhere out there might be a better version of you waiting to take your place. And once it does, there's no going back. The next time you look in the mirror, take a good, long look. Are you sure it's really you looking back? Story 15. The first time the elevator ride felt a little longer than usual, I brushed it off as my imagination. By the 3rd day, I knew something was terribly wrong. Now, a week later, I'm trapped in a nightmare where reality shifts with each floor, and I'm not sure I'll ever find my way back home. My name is Mia, and until recently, I was just another cog in the corporate machine, working as a junior analyst on the 37th floor of the Apex building in downtown Chicago. The morning commute, the endless meetings, the microwaved lunches, it was all comfortingly mundane, until it wasn't. It started on a Monday. I remember because I was running late, having hit snooze one too many times. I rushed into the lobby, my heels clicking on the polished marble floor as I made a beeline for the elevators. I squeezed in just as the doors were closing, earning a few annoyed looks from my fellow sardines. As we began our ascent, I tried to calm my racing heart, silently willing the elevator to move faster. That's when I first noticed it. A slight hesitation between floors, a moment where the elevator seemed to hang suspended before lurching upward again. I frowned, glancing at the other passengers. No one else seemed to have noticed anything amiss. Just my nerves making me hyper-aware, I told myself. When the doors finally opened on the 37th floor, I breathed a sigh of relief and hurried to my desk, the weird elevator moment already fading from my mind. The next day, it happened again. This time, the pause was longer, more noticeable. As we hung there between the 23rd and 24th floors, I could have sworn I saw the numbers on the digital display flicker, showing impossible floor numbers, -100, 3, 56, 12, before settling back to 24. I blinked hard. Sure, I must be seeing things. When I looked again, everything seemed normal, but a knot of unease had formed in the pit of my stomach. Did anyone else see that? I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet elevator. A few people glanced at me, their expressions ranging from confused to annoyed. One guy, probably an intern, judging by his ill-fitting suit, gave me a sympathetic smile. "See what?" he asked. I hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. "Never mind," I muttered, staring at my shoes for the rest of the ride. By the 3rd day, I was actively dreading my morning elevator ride. As I stepped into the car, my palms were sweating, heart racing. This time, I positioned myself where I could clearly see the floor numbers. We started up, the familiar hum of the elevator filling the air. 5, 6, 7. Between the 15th and 16th floors, it happened. The elevator shuddered to a stop, the lights flickering ominously. And then, impossibly, we started moving sideways. I gasped, grabbing the handrail for support. "What's happening?" I cried out. But when I looked around, no one else was reacting. They all stood calmly, staring straight ahead or at their phones, as if this were a perfectly normal elevator ride. The digital display was going haywire, numbers and symbols flashing by too fast to read. Through the gap in the doors, I caught glimpses of impossible things. A vast desert, a futuristic cityscape, an underground cavern filled with bioluminescent fungi. Just as I thought I might scream from the sheer impossibility of it all, the elevator gave another lurch and resumed its upward journey. When the doors opened on the 37th floor, I practically fell out in my haste to escape. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, jumping every time I heard the ding of the elevator. My co-workers noticed something was off. "You okay, Mia?" My cubicle neighbor, Jeff, asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Just didn't sleep well," I lied. "Hey, have you noticed anything weird about the elevators lately?" Jeff raised an eyebrow. "Weird how?" I hesitated, not sure how to explain without sounding completely insane. "Never mind," I said finally. "It's probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing, and things were about to get much, much worse. The next morning, I seriously considered taking the stairs. 47 flights suddenly seemed preferable to another reality-bending elevator ride. But as I stood in the lobby, staring at the stair sign, I felt a strange pull towards the elevators, like they were calling to me. Before I knew it, I was stepping into the car, my heart pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. The ride started normally enough. 10, 11, 12. Then, between the 20th and 21st floors, everything went wrong. The elevator shuddered violently, the lights flickering before going out completely. I heard screams. My own, I realized distantly, as we plummeted downward. Just as suddenly as it started, the fall stopped. The impact sent me sprawling to the floor. As I lay there, gasping for breath, the lights slowly came back on. I looked up, expecting to see panicked faces of my fellow passengers. Instead, I found myself alone in the elevator, and it wasn't the same elevator I'd entered. This car was older, wood-paneled with brass fixtures. The digital display was gone, replaced by an analog dial that currently pointed to a symbol I didn't recognize. Not a number, but a strange, swirling glyph. With shaking legs, I pulled myself to my feet. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. But instead of the familiar office lobby, I found myself staring at a vast, alien landscape. Purple grass swayed in a breeze I couldn't feel, under a sky filled with 3 moons. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the elevator wall. This couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming. The doors closed before I could decide whether to step out or not. The elevator began to move again, but I couldn't tell what direction. Up, down, sideways. All sense of orientation was lost. When the doors next opened, I was looking at a scene from what seemed to be the 1950s. People in vintage clothes walked past, not seeming to notice the elevator or me standing in it. The next stop showed me a post-apocalyptic wasteland, then an underwater city, then a world where everything seemed to be made of clockwork gears. With each floor, each impossible scene, I felt my grip on reality slipping. Was I going mad? Had I always been mad, and just now realizing it? I lost track of how many floors, how many realities I witnessed. Time seemed to have no meaning in this nightmare elevator. Finally, after what felt like hours, or maybe days, The doors opened on a scene I recognized. The 37th floor of the Apex building. My floor. With a sob of relief, I stumbled out. Everything looked normal. The beige carpet, the rows of cubicles, the potted plant by the water cooler that always looked on the verge of death. But as I walked towards my desk on shaky legs, I began to notice small differences. The names on the cubicles were wrong. The view out the window showed a cityscape I didn't recognize. And when I reached my desk, someone else was sitting there. Someone who looked up at me with my own face. "Oh," my doppelganger said, sounding mildly surprised. "You're early. We weren't expecting you for another week." I backed away, my mind reeling. This wasn't my world. This wasn't my reality. I turned and ran for the elevators, ignoring the startled looks from not quite right co-workers. I had to get back. Had to find my way home. As I jabbed frantically at the call button, I heard my own voice behind me. "It won't work, you know. You can't go back. The elevators only go forward." The doors opened, and I threw myself inside, punching buttons at random. As the car began to move, taking me to who knows what floor of what reality, I realized the horrible truth. I was lost. Lost in a multiverse of endless floors, endless realities. And I had no idea how to find my way back to mine. Now, I ride the elevators endlessly, hoping that the next stop, the next floor, will be the one I call home. Sometimes I see other lost souls like me, their eyes wild with the knowledge of too many realities. So, if you're reading this, be careful the next time you step into an elevator. Pay attention to the ride, to the floors you pass. And if you ever notice the journey taking just a little too long, or the numbers not quite adding up, take the stairs, no matter how many flights, because once you enter the wrong floor, there may be no way back. And somewhere out there, in some other reality, another you might be living your life, never knowing the real you is lost in the spaces between floors, between worlds, riding elevators for eternity. Story 16. The first time I saw the perfect circle of ash, I thought it was just a bizarre coincidence. By the third morning, I knew something was terribly wrong. Now, a week later, I'm trapped in a time loop that's slowly driving me insane, and I fear I may never escape. My name is Daniel, and until recently, I was just a struggling artist trying to find inspiration in a rented cabin in the woods. Now, I'm not sure if I'm uncovering the secrets of the universe or losing my mind. Maybe both. It started on a crisp autumn morning. I had dragged myself out of bed at dawn, determined to catch the perfect light for a landscape I'd been working on. Coffee in hand, I shuffled out onto the porch, only to stop dead in my tracks. There, in the center of the small clearing in front of the cabin, was a perfect circle of ash. About 3 feet in diameter, it looked like someone had carefully poured a ring of fine, grey powder on the ground. The grass inside the circle was untouched, dewy and green in the early morning light. "What the hell?" I muttered, setting down my coffee and approaching the circle. As I got closer, I noticed something odd. There was no breeze, but the ash seemed to be moving, swirling ever so slightly, like water going down a drain in slow motion. I reached out to touch it, but something made me hesitate. A chill ran down my spine, and I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I glanced around, but the woods were silent and still. Shaking off the weird feeling, I went back to the porch and grabbed my phone to take a picture. But when I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. The circle didn't show up in the photo, just the normal clearing, no ash in sight. I looked up, blinking hard. The circle was still there, ash swirling gently. Okay, that's... Unsettling, I said to no one in particular. I spent the rest of the day alternating between working on my painting and obsessively checking on the ash circle. It never changed, never moved, just sat there, swirling gently, impossible to photograph. As the sun began to set, I decided to do something about it. I grabbed a broom from the cabin and marched out to the clearing, determined to sweep away the ash and put an end to this weirdness. But as soon as the bristles touched the edge of the circle, I felt a jolt like static electricity, but stronger. The ash seemed to pulse, the swirling speeding up for a moment, before settling back to its gentle motion. "Nope," I said, dropping the broom and backing away. Nope, nope, nope. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning, my dreams filled with swirling grey shapes and whispered voices I couldn't quite understand. The next morning, I practically ran to the porch, half expecting the circle to be gone, but it was still there, unchanged. I breathed a sigh of relief. At least I wasn't going completely crazy. That's when I noticed the time on my phone. 7:14 a.m. Exactly the same time I had first seen the circle yesterday. Weird coincidence, I muttered, trying to ignore the growing knot of unease in my stomach. The day passed much like the one before. I painted, I checked on the circle, I tried and failed to photograph it. As night fell, I found myself standing at the edge of the circle again, staring into its gently swirling depths. On an impulse, I reached out and touched the ash. It was cool and soft, like silk running through my fingers. But as I pulled my hand back, I noticed something strange. The ash clung to my skin, swirling up my arm in intricate patterns. Panicked, I tried to brush it off, but it only spread faster. Within seconds, my entire body was covered in swirling, ash-like patterns. The world around me began to blur and spin, and then darkness. I woke with a start, gasping for breath. Sunlight was streaming through the cabin windows. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding. 7:14 a.m. "No," I whispered. "No, this isn't possible." I ran outside, already knowing what I would find. The circle was there, perfect and undisturbed, ash swirling gently. That's when I realized I was reliving the same day, again. The next few days, if you can call them that, were a blur of increasing panic and desperation. I tried everything I could think of to break the loop. I stayed awake all night, watching the circle. I tried to leave the cabin, only to find myself walking out the front door at 7:14 a.m. Again, I even tried to hurt myself, thinking the shock might jolt me out of whatever this was. Nothing worked. Every morning, 7:14 a.m. Every morning, the circle waiting for me. By the 7th repetition, I was a wreck. Lack of sleep. Did sleep even matter in a time loop? And constant stress had left me jittery and paranoid. I was seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadowy figures darting between trees, the ash forming faces before swirling back into randomness. That's when I decided to do something drastic. If touching the ash had started this, maybe it could end it too. As the sun began to set on the 7th, or was it the 700th repetition, I stood at the edge of the circle. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Here goes nothing," I muttered, and stepped into the circle. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The ash rose up around me, swirling faster and faster until it formed a grey tornado with me at its center. I could hear whispers now, countless voices speaking in languages I didn't understand. Images flashed before my eyes. Past, present, future, all jumbled together. I saw myself as a child, as an old man, in lives I had never lived. I saw the birth of stars and the death of galaxies, and through it all, a message began to form. Not in words, but in a deep, instinctual understanding. Time is not a line, but a circle. All moments exist simultaneously, eternally repeating, and I had stumbled into a place where that truth was laid bare. Just as I thought my mind would shatter from the weight of this revelation, everything stopped. The ash settled, the visions faded. I found myself standing in the clearing, the circle of ash at my feet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. With shaking hands, I pulled it out. 7:15 a.m. 1 minute had passed. The loop was broken. But as I stood there, trying to process what had happened, I realized something had changed. The world around me seemed sharper somehow, more vibrant, and I could still hear them. The whispers, the echoes of countless realities. I had broken free of the loop, but at what cost? The knowledge I had gained, the things I had seen, they were too much for one mind to bear. Now, I sit in the cabin, writing this as a warning. The circle of ash is still there, swirling gently, waiting. I know now that it's a portal, a window into the true nature of time and reality. But it's not meant for us, not for our limited, linear minds. I don't know how long I can hold on to my sanity. The whispers are getting louder, the visions more frequent. I see possibilities branching out from every moment, infinite realities overlapping. So if you're reading this, be careful in the woods. If you ever come across a perfect circle of ash, don't touch it. Don't step into it. No matter how curious you are, no matter how much you think you want to know the truth. Because once you've seen beyond the circle, there's no going back. Time becomes meaningless when you can see all of it at once. And the human mind isn't built for that kind of eternity. I can hear the ash calling to me now. It wants me to step into the circle again, to rejoin the endless dance of time. And God help me, I think I want to. Maybe this time I'll find a way to truly break free. Or maybe I'll be trapped forever, reliving the same moment for eternity. Either way, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Lost in the spaces between seconds, in the swirling patterns of ash that hold the secrets of the universe. Just remember, time is a circle, and sometimes that circle is made of ash. Story 17. The first time I heard the whispers from the woodpile, I thought it was just the wind. By the third night, I knew something was terribly wrong. Now, a week later, I'm trapped in a nightmare of my own making, and the story that's unfolding might be the death of me. My name is Liam, and until recently, I was just another struggling writer looking for inspiration in a quaint cabin in the woods. Now, I'm not sure if I'm uncovering a terrifying truth or losing my grip on reality. Maybe both. It all started on a chilly autumn evening. I had come to this isolated cabin, miles from the nearest town, hoping to finally finish my novel. The place was perfect. Rustic charm, no distractions, and a massive stone fireplace to keep me warm during the long nights of writing. That first night, as I sat at my laptop, fingers hovering hesitantly over the keys, I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible over the crackling of the fire. I paused, cocking my head to listen. "Hello?" I called out, feeling a bit foolish. Of course, no one answered. I was alone out here, miles from anyone. Just the wind, I told myself, turning back to my stubbornly blank document. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. A voice, low and urgent, coming from the direction of the fireplace. "Help us," it seemed to say. "Tell our story." I shot to my feet, heart pounding. The voice was impossible to ignore now. It was coming from the woodpile stacked neatly beside the hearth. Cautiously, I approached. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. As I reached out to touch a log, I felt a jolt, like static electricity, but stronger. And suddenly, words began to flow into my mind. Without thinking, I rushed back to my laptop and started typing. The words poured out of me, a story I had never imagined but somehow knew by heart. It was a tale of dark forests, ancient rituals, in a town with terrible secrets. I wrote for hours, lost in a fever dream of creativity. When I finally came to my senses, the sun was rising. I had written more in one night than I had in the past month. Exhausted but exhilarated, I fell into bed, the whispers from the woodpile now silent. The next night, it happened again. As soon as I sat down at my laptop, the whispers started. This time, I didn't hesitate. I dove into the story, letting the voices guide my fingers across the keys. The tale grew darker, more twisted. I wrote of hidden covens, of sacrifices in moonlit clearings, of an evil that slumbered beneath the forest floor. Part of me was horrified by what I was writing, but a larger part was thrilled. This was the best work I'd ever done. By the third night, I was addicted. I couldn't wait for the sun to set, for the whispers to start. I barely ate, barely slept. All that mattered was the story. But as I wrote, I began to notice things. Small, unsettling things. The shadows in the corners of the cabin seemed deeper, more alive. The woods outside my window grew darker, the trees pressing closer to the cabin. And sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I could swear I saw figures moving among the trees. Pale, elongated shapes that vanished when I tried to look directly at them. It's just your imagination, I told myself. You're writing a horror story. Of course you're seeing things. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The story was changing me, changing the world around me. On the fourth night, I made a terrifying discovery. As I reread what I'd written, I realized that some of the characters shared names with people I knew. My old high school girlfriend, my estranged brother, my elderly neighbor back in the city, and the things happening to these characters. They were horrible. Gruesome deaths, descents into madness, fates worse than death. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I hadn't had a bar since I arrived at the cabin, but I could still see the date. My blood ran cold. According to my phone, I'd been here for 3 weeks, not for days. No, I whispered, that's not possible. But even as I said it, I knew it was true. I had lost time, lost myself in the story. And now, I feared there was no going back. That night, the whispers were louder than ever. But now they didn't just come from the woodpile. They seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin, from the dark woods outside. Keep writing, they urged. The story must be told. The ritual must be completed. I tried to resist. I shut my laptop, covered my ears, even considered making a run for my car. But the pull of the story was too strong. Almost against my will, I found myself back at the keyboard. As I wrote, the world around me began to change. The cabin grew larger, older. The woods pressed closer, branches scratching at the windows like skeletal fingers. The fire in the hearth burned with an unnatural, greenish light. I wrote of a writer, lost in the woods, of a cabin that was more than it seemed, of an ancient evil awakening, hungry for sacrifice. With growing horror, I realized I wasn't creating this story. I was transcribing it, living it. The characters I had named, the people I knew. I was writing their doom. And with each word, each chapter, I could feel reality shifting around me. By the 6th night, I was a prisoner in a nightmare of my own creation. The cabin had become a twisted reflection of itself, the walls oozing with a black, tar-like substance. The whispers were constant now, a maddening chorus urging me to finish the story. I tried to write a happy ending. I tried to save my characters, to stop the awakening evil. But the words wouldn't come. My fingers typed out horror after horror, atrocity after atrocity, and with each paragraph, I could feel myself changing. My reflection in the laptop screen showed a gaunt face, eyes sunken and feverish. My hair had grown long and matted. How long had I really been here? As I started what I knew would be the final chapter, I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, dreading what I might see, I turned. The room was filled with them. Pale, twisted figures. The characters from my story. My high school girlfriend, flesh rotting from her bones. My brother, eyes gouged out and mouth stretched in a silent scream. Dozens of others, all watching me with a terrible, hungry anticipation. "Finish it," they whispered in unison. "Complete the ritual. Set us free." With trembling hands, I turned back to the laptop. I knew what would happen if I finished the story. The evil I had been writing about, the darkness slumbering beneath the forest. It would awaken. And not just in the story, in the real world. But I also knew there was no escaping it now. I was as much a part of this story as the characters I had created. The only way out was through. As I typed the final words, I felt something fundamental shift in the world around me. The cabin dissolved, the walls melting away to reveal an endless, primordial forest. The sky above was no longer blue, but a roiling mass of crimson and black. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, and from the earth beneath my feet, something began to rise. Something ancient and hungry and utterly alien. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, but it didn't come. Instead, I heard a new voice. My voice. The story is told. The ritual is complete, but the ending is yet to be written. I opened my eyes to find myself back in the cabin. Normal, ordinary, sunlight streaming through the windows. My laptop sat on the desk, the document open to the final page. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, a vivid, terrifying hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. But then I saw it. A single line of text, below my own writing. Words I hadn't typed. "What happens next is up to you, Liam. The pen is in your hands. But remember, every story has consequences. Choose wisely." Now, I sit here staring at that cursed blinking cursor. The wood in the fireplace remains silent, but I can feel the weight of countless unseen eyes upon me. Waiting, watching, hungry for what I'll write next. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if I'm still in the story or if the story is in me. All I know is that I have to keep writing. Because if I stop, if I leave the story unfinished, I fear what might come crawling out of these pages and into the real world. So if you're reading this, beware of whispers in the night. Beware of stories that write themselves. And most of all, beware of the power of words. Because sometimes the pen is more than mighty. Sometimes it's downright deadly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a story to finish. God help us all. Story 18. The day I discovered the old voicemail on my phone was the day my life began to unravel. It was my own voice, warning me about something I hadn't done yet. Now, a week later, I am trapped in a nightmare of my own making. desperately trying to prevent a future I don't understand. My name is Sarah, and until recently, I was just another overworked graphic designer in Chicago. Now, I'm not sure who or when I am anymore. It started on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was sorting through my phone, deleting old photos and messages to free up space, when I came across a voicemail I didn't recognize. The timestamp said it was from 3 years ago, but I could have sworn I'd cleared out all my old messages last month. Curious, I hit play. Sarah, listen to me. This is you, future you. Whatever you do, don't. The message cut off abruptly. My own voice, panicked and breathless, warning me about something. I played it again, my heart racing. It was definitely my voice, but I had no memory of ever leaving myself a message like this. And the fear in my tone sent chills down my spine. What the hell? I muttered, staring at my phone like it might bite me. I tried calling the number back, but got an error message saying it didn't exist. I googled the area code. It was for a small town in Oregon I'd never even heard of. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, my mind spinning with possibilities. Was this some elaborate prank, a glitch in my phone, or something more sinister? The next morning, bleary-eyed and jittery from too much coffee, I decided to confide in my best friend and co-worker, Mike. Okay, this is going to sound crazy, I said, perching on the edge of his desk. Mike looked up from his computer, raising an eyebrow. Hit me, I explained about the voicemail, watching his expression change from amusement to concern. That's weird, he said finally. But come on, Sarah. There's got to be a logical explanation. Maybe you were drunk and playing a prank on yourself. I shook my head. I don't drink, remember? Besides, this doesn't feel like a prank. You didn't hear my voice, Mike. I was terrified. He frowned, clearly unsure what to say. Look, why don't you try calling your phone company? Maybe they can trace where the call came from. It was a sensible suggestion, so I did just that on my lunch break. But the customer service rep was as baffled as I was. I'm sorry, ma'am, but according to our records, that voicemail doesn't exist, she said. Are you sure you didn't dream this? I hung up, feeling more unsettled than ever. Was I losing my mind? That night, I played the message again, and again, and again. Each time, I strained to hear something new, some clue I might have missed. But it was always the same, my own voice cut off mid-warning. As I finally drifted off to sleep, the phone clutched to my chest. I had no idea that things were about to get much, much stranger. I woke with a start at 3:17 a.m., the exact time the mysterious voicemail had been left. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure what had woken me. Then I heard a soft beep from my phone, indicating a new voicemail. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone. One new message, from the same non-existent number. I hit play, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear. Sarah, please. You have to listen. Don't go to work tomorrow. Don't again. The message cut off. But this time, I could hear something in the background. A low, pulsing hum, like some kind of machinery. I didn't sleep again that night. When my alarm went off at 7, I stared at it for a long moment, debating. The sensible part of me said to ignore the warning, to go about my day normally. But a deeper, more primal part was screaming at me to heed my own advice. In the end, fear won out. I called in sick, ignoring Mike's concerned texts, asking where I was. I spent the day pacing my small apartment, jumping at every sound, obsessively checking my phone for more messages. None came. Around 2 p.m., my phone rang. It was Mike. Sarah, thank God, he said, his voice shaky. Are you okay? "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, confused by his tone. "What's going on?" There was a long pause. You haven't seen the news?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "No, what happened?" "There was an accident at work. A car. It crashed through the front of the building, right into our office. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Was anyone hurt?" Another pause. "Sarah, it went right through your desk. If you'd been there..." I didn't hear the rest of what he said. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. I had just avoided death by listening to a warning from my future self. The next few days passed in a blur of police interviews and insurance paperwork. I told no one about the voicemails. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? But the messages kept coming. Each night at 3:17 a.m., my phone would beep. Each time, it was my own voice, warning me about increasingly specific events. Don't take the Blue Line train on Friday. Stay away from the coffee corner on 5th Street. Whatever you do, don't open the door when the man in the red hat knocks. I followed each instruction to the letter, and each time I would later learn of some terrible event I had narrowly avoided. A train derailment, a shooting at a cafe, a serial killer arrested in my neighborhood. I should have felt grateful. Instead, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. How was this possible? How could I be warning myself about future events? A week after the first message, I received the most chilling one yet. "Sarah, listen carefully. You need to leave Chicago. Tonight, go to Millbrook, Oregon. Find Dr. Elias Jun. He's the only one who can help us. But be careful. They're watching. They know what we can do." The message ended with that same mechanical hum I'd heard before, louder this time. I sat on my bed, my mind reeling. Leave Chicago. Go to some town I'd never heard of. It was insane. But then again, so was everything else that had happened this week. I did a quick search for Dr. Elias Chun. He was a physicist, specializing in quantum mechanics and time travel theory. My hands were shaking as I booked a red-eye flight to Portland, the closest major airport to Millbrook. I packed a bag in a daze, my mind spinning with questions. Who was watching me? What did I mean by what we can do? As I was about to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Hey, want to grab dinner? Need to talk to you about something important?" I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the reply button. Every instinct screamed at me to confide in my best friend, to not face this insanity alone. But then I remembered the warning. They're watching. With a heavy heart, I turned off my phone without replying. I took one last look around my apartment, wondering if I'd ever see it again, and stepped out into the night. The flight to Portland was a blur of anxiety and half-formed theories. By the time I landed and rented a car for the drive to Millbrook, I was running on nothing but adrenaline and gas station coffee. Millbrook turned out to be a tiny logging town, nestled in the shadow of moss-covered mountains. I found Dr. Chun's lab on the outskirts, a surprisingly modern building amid the rustic surroundings. As I pulled into the parking lot, my phone beeped. Another voicemail. "We're almost there, Sarah. But remember, trust no one. Not even yourself." I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. Whatever answers awaited me inside, I had a feeling my life would never be the same. As I reached for the door handle, I caught a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror. A man in a red hat was walking across the parking lot, heading straight for me. My future self's warning echoed in my mind. Don't open the door when the man in the red hat knocks. But I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I was here, in Millbrook, because my future self had told me to come.
So do the warnings still apply?
The man was getting closer. I had seconds to decide. Trust no one, my future self had said. Not even yourself. In that moment, I realized the true horror of my situation. I was caught in a web of my own warnings, never knowing which to heed and which to ignore. The future was fluid, changing with each decision I made based on my own advice. I was trapped in a paradox of my own making. As the man in the red hat reached my car, his hand raising to knock on the window, I made my choice. For better or worse, I would forge my own path. I opened the door. Story 19. The first night I used the sleep tracking app, I thought the strange data was just a glitch. By the third night, I knew something was terribly wrong. Now, a week later, I'm trapped in a waking nightmare, desperately trying to stay awake because what happens when I sleep is too horrifying to face. My name is Alex, and until recently, I was just another techo-obsessed insomniac in Silicon Valley. Now, I'm not sure if I'm uncovering a terrifying truth about the nature of sleep or losing my mind entirely. Maybe both. It all started when I downloaded Sleep Sentry, the latest app promising to revolutionize our understanding of sleep. As a chronic insomniac and data junkie, I was eager to gain insights into my nightly struggles. The app used my phone's sensors to track movement, sound, and even brainwave patterns while I slept. That first night, I placed my phone on the nightstand, feeling a mix of excitement and skepticism as I drifted off. When I woke the next morning, bleary-eyed and groggy as usual, I immediately reached for my phone to check the results. The interface was slick, all soothing blues and whites. But as I scrolled through the data, my heart began to race. According to Sleep Sentry, I had gotten up and walked around my apartment for nearly an hour in the middle of the night. The movement chart showed clear, purposeful activity. That's impossible, I muttered, rubbing my eyes. I was a light sleeper. There's no way I could have sleepwalked for an hour without waking up. Even stranger were the audio recordings. The app had captured what sounded like whispered conversations, but the voices were distorted, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. I played the clip again, pressing my ear to the speaker. A chill ran down my spine as I made out a single word in English, repeated several times. Soon, I shook my head, trying to rationalize. It had to be a glitch, or maybe interference from a neighbor's TV. I decided to try again the next night, making sure to close all my windows and turn off any potential sources of noise. The second night's data was even more unsettling. Not only did it show me moving around again, but this time there was a clear pattern to my movements. The app had mapped them out, and to my horror, I realized I had been tracing complex geometric shapes on my apartment floor. Circles inside, triangles, spirals, and symbols I didn't recognize. The audio was clearer this time, too. Still mostly unintelligible, but I could make out phrases. The gate is opening. They're coming through. Prepare the vessel. My hands were shaking as I put down the phone. This couldn't be real. I racked my brain, trying to remember any dreams from the night before, but came up blank. As far as I knew, I had slept soundly through the night. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I set up a camera in my bedroom for the third night. I also invited my best friend, Jamie, to sleep on my couch, thinking maybe having someone else in the apartment would stop whatever was happening. That was my first big mistake. The next morning, I woke to find Jamie gone. No note, no text, nothing. When I checked the Sleep Sentry data, my blood ran cold. The app showed both of us moving around the apartment, engaged in some kind of synchronized ritual. The audio was full of two voices chanting in unison, but the camera footage showed something else entirely. something impossible. In the video, Jamie and I were sound asleep in our respective beds all night. Yet objects in my room, books, lamps, even my heavy dresser, were moving on their own, floating and rearranging themselves into the same symbols I had apparently traced on the floor the night before. I tried calling Jamie, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent texts, emails, even tried reaching out on social media. Nothing. It was like they had vanished off the face of the earth. That's when the true terror set in. This wasn't a glitch or a prank. Something was happening to me, to us, while we slept. Something beyond rational explanation. I spent that day in a panic, alternating between trying to reach Jamie and researching sleep phenomena. I found nothing that could explain what I was experiencing. By nightfall, I was a jittery mess, chugging coffee and energy drinks, determined not to sleep. But at some point, exhaustion won out. I woke up, slumped over my laptop, sunlight streaming through the windows. With trembling hands, I checked the Sleep Sentry app. The data from that night nearly stopped my heart. The movement patterns showed me leaving my apartment, walking to a nearby park. The audio was clearer than ever, my own voice speaking in that strange language. But now I could understand every word. The alignment is complete. The boundary between worlds thins. In 3 nights, the gate will open and they will come through. I offer myself as vessel and gateway. I played it again and again, trying to make sense of it. A gate, other worlds. It sounded like something out of a bad sci-fi movie. But the evidence was piling up, becoming harder to deny with each passing night. I spent the next day in a frenzy of research and preparation. I bought every stimulant I could find over the counter, rigged up lights and alarms all over my apartment, and even considered handcuffing myself to my bed. Anything to stop whatever was happening when I slept. But deep down, I knew it was futile. Whatever force was at work here, it was beyond my comprehension or control. The next 2 nights were a blur of terror and confusion. Despite my best efforts, I would always find myself waking up in strange places. On my roof, in my building's basement, once even in the middle of the street. The Sleep Sentry data showed increasingly complex rituals and chants, all counting down to some great awakening. Objects in my apartment began to change, subtly at first, then more drastically. The angles of my rooms seemed off, doors leading to places they shouldn't. I'd open my closet to find a vast, dark space stretching beyond what was physically possible. And always, that mechanical hum in the background of the audio recordings grew louder. By the 7th night, the night the gate was supposed to open, I was a wreck. I hadn't properly slept in days, my mind a fog of caffeine and fear. I had barricaded myself in my bathroom, the only room that still seemed normal, still seemed to follow the laws of physics I understood. As midnight approached, I sat in the empty bathtub, clutching my phone, the Sleep Sentry app open and waiting. Whatever was going to happen, I was determined to face it head-on. The clock struck 12, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, my phone began to vibrate, harder and harder, until it was practically jumping out of my hand. The screen glitched, numbers and symbols flashing by too fast to read. And then, silence. The vibration stopped. The screen went dark. Slowly, eerily, the app reopened itself. But instead of the usual interface, there was only a black screen with white text. Congratulations, Alex. You've been an excellent beta tester. Your data has been invaluable. The gate is open. They are here. And now, it's time for you to meet your new masters. The bathroom door burst open, revealing not my apartment, but a vast, alien landscape. Twisted structures rose against an impossible sky, and shapes moved in the distance that hurt my eyes to look at directly. As I felt myself being pulled toward this nightmare realm, one last message flashed on my phone. Don't forget to rate us 5 stars on the App Store. Now I'm somewhere else. Someone else. I don't know if this message will reach anyone in the world I knew, but if it does, heed my warning. Be careful what apps you use. Be careful what permissions you grant. Because sometimes the price of a good night's sleep is higher than you could ever imagine. And if you ever come across an app called Sleep Sentry, for the love of all that's holy, don't download it. Don't use it. Because it's not tracking your sleep. It's tracking your soul. And once it has that, there's no escaping the nightmares that follow. Story 20. The day I stepped back into my childhood home, I thought I was confronting my past. Instead, I found myself trapped in a nightmarish loop of memories, where each room shifted to reflect a different stage of my life. Now, I'm lost in a maze of my own history, desperately searching for a way out before I lose myself completely. My name is Ethan, and until yesterday, I was just another 30-something trying to make peace with my past. Now, I'm not sure if I'm reliving my life or losing my mind. Maybe both. It all started when my mum called, her voice tight with that forced cheerfulness she uses when she's worried. Ethan, honey, I think it's time we cleaned out the old house. The realtor says it'll sell better empty. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Our old Victorian had been sitting vacant since Dad died 5 years ago. Neither of us able to face going back. Too many memories, Mum always said. But I knew we couldn't put it off forever. Sure, Mum, I heard myself say. I'll head over this weekend. That's how I found myself standing on the cracked walkway early Saturday morning, staring up at the looming facade of my childhood home. The pale yellow paint was peeling, the flower beds overgrown. It looked smaller than I remembered. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of wild roses and damp earth, and climbed the creaky porch steps. The key stuck in the lock, and for a moment I thought I'd have to call a locksmith. But then it turned with a reluctant groan, and I stepped inside. The foyer was exactly as I remembered. Faded wallpaper, dusty crystal chandelier, that ugly umbrella stand shaped like an elephant's foot. But something felt off. The air was too still, heavy with the weight of forgotten things. "Hello!" I called out, not sure why. I knew the house was empty. My voice echoed strangely, seeming to bounce off walls that were further away than they should be. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Just my imagination playing tricks. I made my way to the living room, planning to start the cleaning there. But as I crossed the threshold, the world shifted. The dusty furniture disappeared, replaced by the bright colors and plastic toys of a toddler's playroom. I stumbled, disoriented. "Ethan, sweetie, be careful with Mummy's vase." I spun around. There was my mother, 25 years younger, reaching out to steady a swaying end table. And there I was, 3 years old, guilty expression on my chubby face, toy truck clutched in my pudgy hands. "What the hell?" I muttered, backing away. This wasn't possible. I blinked hard, expecting the scene to disappear. But it didn't. Instead, little Ethan turned and looked directly at me, his eyes wide with confusion. "Daddy?" he asked, tilting his head. I felt the blood drain from my face. This couldn't be happening. I turned and ran, bursting back into the foyer. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the scene behind me vanished. The living room was once again dusty and abandoned. My heart was pounding as I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. "Get it together, Ethan. I whispered to myself. It's just stress. You're imagining things. But deep down, I knew. Something impossible was happening in this house. Determined to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy, I decided to head upstairs to my old bedroom. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent house. As I reached for the doorknob of my room, I hesitated. What would I find inside? Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room shimmered and changed before my eyes, transforming into a teenager's messy haven. Posters of bands I'd forgotten I'd liked plastered the walls. A prehistoric computer hummed on a cluttered desk. And there, sprawled on the bed with a physics textbook, was 16-year-old me. I watched, frozen, as teenage Ethan sat up, rubbing his eyes. He looked right at me, but there was no recognition in his gaze. "Dad," he called out, voice cracking. "Is dinner ready?" I stumbled backward, slamming the door shut. The hallway spun around me, and I had to grip the banister to keep from falling. This was insane. I was insane. But as I stood there, trying to slow my racing heart, a horrible realization began to dawn. Each room seemed to be a window into a different part of my past. The living room had shown me as a toddler, my bedroom a teenager. What would I find in the other rooms? Part of me wanted to flee, to run out of the house and never look back. But a larger part was morbidly curious. And underneath it all was a growing fear. What if I couldn't leave? What if I was trapped in this nightmare house, forced to relive my memories forever? With shaking hands, I reached for the next door, my parents' old room. As I stepped inside, the air grew thick and heavy, smelling of antiseptic and illness. The cheerful wallpaper melted away, replaced by stark white walls and beeping medical equipment. There, in a hospital bed that had no business being in this room, lay my father. Pale, gaunt, hooked up to machines that were keeping him alive. And beside him, holding his hand, was me, 5 years younger, unshaven and hollow-eyed. "Ethan," my father's voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "Is that you, son?" I felt tears spring to my eyes. This was the last conversation I'd had with my father before he passed. The last time I'd heard his voice. The younger me looked up, confusion etched on his face. "Dad, I'm right here." I backed out of the room, unable to bear it any longer. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the hospital scene vanished, leaving only the dusty, abandoned bedroom. My mind was reeling. This wasn't just reliving memories. The people in these scenes could see me, could interact with me. Was I changing my past just by being here? I made my way back downstairs in a daze, no longer sure what was real and what wasn't. The house seemed to be growing around me, corridors stretching impossibly long, new doors appearing where none had been before. In the kitchen, I found my first kiss playing out by the refrigerator. In the dining room, my college graduation dinner, complete with proud parents and embarrassing toasts. Each room held a different memory, a different piece of my life. But it wasn't all pleasant nostalgia. In the basement, I relived my worst fight with my father, harsh words echoing off concrete walls. In a closet I didn't remember, I watched myself get fired from my first job, shame and anger burning in my younger self's eyes. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time had no meaning in this place. I wandered from room to room, lost in a labyrinth of my own memories. Sometimes I interacted with the scenes, trying to change things, to make better choices. Other times, I just watched, a silent observer to my own life. I began to lose track of which Ethan I was. Was I the observer or the participant? Had I always been here, reliving these moments in an endless loop? Just as I felt I was about to lose my grip on reality entirely, I found myself back in the foyer. But this time, it wasn't empty. A figure stood by the door. A man, his back to me. As I approached, he turned, and I found myself staring into my own eyes. But this wasn't a younger me, or even my current self. This was older, grey hair at the temples, lines around the eyes. "It's time to go, Ethan," my older self said, his voice gentle but firm. "Go where?" I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. "What is this place?" He smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "This is a crossroads, a place between memory and possibility. You've been lost in your past, but it's time to face your future." "I don't understand," I said, feeling like a child again. "You will," he replied, reaching for the door. "But for now, it's time to wake up." As his hand touched the doorknob, a blinding light filled the foyer. I felt myself falling, spinning, the house dissolving around me. I woke with a gasp, sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure of where or when I was. Slowly, reality settled back in. I was in my apartment, not the old house. It had all been a dream, hadn't it? But as I reached for my phone to check the time, I noticed something on my nightstand. A key, old, tarnished brass. The key to my childhood home. And beside it, a note in handwriting that was mine, but not quite. "The past is a lesson, not a dwelling place. The future is unwritten. Choose wisely." Single quotes now. I sit here, staring at that key, unsure what to do next. Was it all just an incredibly vivid dream, a hallucination? Or did I really travel through the twisted corridors of my own history? I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened in that house. But I do know this. The next time I step through that door, I won't just be confronting my past. I'll be shaping my future. And that, dear reader, is the most terrifying possibility of all.